Chapter 10-11. Today I'll teach you one thing. The winner is king and the loser is a bandit. Jiang Pingji curled her horsewhip in her hand and pressed it against his face, leaving a red mark. The seventh prince pursed his lips and spat a mouthful of blood at Jiang Pingji, but she was already aware of it, so he did not spit on her. He breathed heavily and said, "Cut the crap. You said it yourself. The winner is king and the loser is a bandit. Those people, haha, they deserve to die. Not to mention the 3 tribes of the northern borderline, even people like you who claim to be benevolent and righteous. When have you ever treated captives kindly? Don't flatter yourself. In this era of cold weapons, captives could not be called people at all, and they did not deserve to be treated like humans. At best they were just spoils of war. The winner had the right to deal with his spoils of war. This was an unchanging rule. The 7th prince would not repent or feel ashamed. Because the northern borderline won, they had the right to deal with the people of the 3 cities of Xianxia. The men were killed to satisfy their bloodthirsty and violent urges. The women were raped to satisfy their inner desires with their bodies and cries. This was the right of the winner. How could the loser have the face to fight for rights and treatment for himself? Jiang Pingji did not get angry. Instead she laughed and asked, "According to your logic, is it justified for me to slaughter all the barbarians of the northern borderline?" Although it was a question, Jiang Pingji used a very firm tone of statement. Every word was filled with frightening murderous intent. The 7th prince's body trembled and his pale face turned livid. "You're not Lu the traitor. Do your words count?" Don't be fooled by the 7th prince's righteous words. He was also a standard double standard. When the northern borderline won, they could wantonly slaughter, plunder, and humiliate the enemy. But when they were defeated by the enemy, they could not stand the enemy treating them like that. Jiang Pingji said, "Of course I mean what I said." The 7th prince was startled. A terrible thought entered his mind and his increasingly muddled consciousness instantly came back. "You are..." At that moment the 7th prince had the illusion of being speechless. If he remembered correctly, the young general in front of him had killed 3 generals of the northern borderline in a row. No, how could she be Lu the traitor? "Lushi?" The 7th prince cried out involuntarily, panting heavily on the horse's back. "How could you be Lushi?" Jiang Pingji lifted her hand and used her little finger to pick her ear. She clicked her tongue. "Why are you so surprised? Haven't you seen our lord fight in person?" The 7th prince was rendered speechless by her words, and his heart was filled with regret. If they had known that she was Lu Shi, they would have used all sorts of methods to kill her. The 7th prince had forgotten that their acting king had given the order to let off the arrows. What was the result? In the end, not a single hair on Jiang Pingji's body was harmed. How shameful. The 7th prince was drenched in cold sweat as he recalled the conversation between the 2 of them just now. The shouts of killing around him shook the heavens, giving him great psychological pressure. The Han clan of the Central Plains believes in Confucianism and boasts of being benevolent. Do you really dare to risk universal condemnation and slaughter the entire northern borderline? The 7th prince stared at Jiang Pingji. He was the meat on the chopping block. The scale of the battlefield was tilted towards Jiang Pingji's side. Nearly half of the northern borderline's territory had fallen into her hands. The 7th prince really could not be stubborn anymore. Hearing him say that, Jiang Pingji smiled. "I finally understand the saying that morality can restrain a gentleman, but it can't restrain a villain. You can unscrupulously slaughter innocent people in Xianxia, but we can't. Do we have to treat you well?" Jiang Pingji raised her hand and pinched the 7th prince's chin. With a little force he felt that Jiang Pingji's hand was like a pair of iron pincers, almost crushing his jaw. "Tisse, your face is really big." The 7th prince was in so much pain that tears came out of his eyes. His wound split open and more fresh, viscous blood gushed out. Jiang Pingji smiled. "Don't worry, I won't slaughter everyone in the northern borderline. But from now on I will make the northern borderline history." Her eyes glinted coldly. The 7th prince's heart skipped a beat and he had a vague bad feeling. "What do you mean?" The 7th prince's breathing was rapid, and his pale cheeks were dyed with an abnormal flush. When the people of the northern borderline don't speak the barbarian language, don't know the barbarian language, and even forget where their ancestors came from, this should be considered the extinction of their clan, right? Jiang Pingji smiled like a flower, but in the eyes of the 7th prince, she was as fierce as a Rakshasa. "Unfortunately, you won't be able to see it." The seventh prince was so angry that blood rushed to his brain and he fainted. Jiang Pingji sneered in disdain. She lifted her machete and leaped onto Little White's back. He pulled the reins. "Little White, let's go." More than 10,000 cavalrymen from the northern borderline were pinned down by Jiang Pingji's army on the left and right, unable to return to defend. On the other hand, the elites of the main force were thrown into disarray by the 3,000 heavy cavalry. The soldiers howled in pain and the formation of the army was in a mess. When Fu Wang saw this, he decisively ordered the entire army to attack. The elites of the middle army followed behind the heavy cavalry and charged towards the enemy's main force, harvesting the enemy's heads. "Kill them. Who told you to hide behind them?" The situation changed in the blink of an eye. The sixth prince was so angry that his eyes were bloodshot. The cavalry of the northern borderline had always been successful. How could they fail? The enemy only had 3,000 heavy cavalry. How could they force back their army of more than 100,000? The sixth prince could not accept such a failure, but reality gave him a hard slap in the face. The cavalry of the northern borderline was not always successful. They had kicked an iron plate. Whoever dares to take a step back will be killed without mercy. The sixth prince drew his sword and killed a few soldiers who were fleeing backward in an attempt to stabilize the army's morale. However, it was all too late. The 3,000 heavy cavalry charged forward in a crushing manner as soon as they arrived. They killed the people of the northern borderline and caused a great deal of psychological pressure. Before the heavy cavalry was exhausted, Fu Wang led the army to rush over. Not only did he support the exhausted heavy cavalry, but he also took over the baton from them. He further suppressed the fighting spirit of the northern borderline and completely destroyed their courage. The morale of the army of the northern borderline was already low. It was even more impossible for them to fight now. Acting king, retreat. The general of the northern borderline protected the sixth prince. His resolute face revealed a rare vulnerability and his eyes were bloodshot. "If we retreat now, we still have a chance." The fighting spirit of the northern borderline had been exhausted. If they did not retreat, their losses would only increase. At such a time, the main general should retreat decisively to prevent losses. The sixth prince gritted his teeth unwillingly. If they retreated now, wouldn't that traitor Lu take advantage of the victory to pursue them? Retreat. Retreat into the royal city. If we don't retreat now, it will be too late. At this moment, the first prince, dressed in armor and covered in blood, rushed over on horseback. His eyes were filled with fatigue. The sixth prince clenched his fists angrily and squeezed out a word: retreat. What could he do even if he was unwilling? He did not want to lose his life here. The third prince followed closely behind the first prince. After the fierce battle just now, he had several wounds on his body and was covered in blood. Retreat now? The first prince roared. Third prince, if we don't retreat now, we won't have a chance to leave. The third prince's eyes widened. His brown pupils were filled with sorrow as if he was about to cry. Chapter 10-12. After several battles, most of the northern borderline cavalry had been lost. If they withdrew their main force, what would happen to the cavalry still fighting on the front line? Abandon them? The northern borderline could not afford this loss. The third prince knew very well that if they gave up the cavalry now, they would only be struggling at death's door. You still have time to care about that? The first prince was so angry that he almost fainted. Do you want to die if you don't withdraw now? The third prince shuddered, seemingly stunned by the first prince's words. After a while he said dryly, without the cavalry, how can we stop Lu Luo? Hide in King City? Their King City was probably no different from a piece of paper in the eyes of the enemy, right? The people of the Central Plains made a living by farming. Their living environment was relatively fixed, so they would build high cities and thick walls to block outside attacks. The three tribes of the northern borderline were nomadic and liked to live by the water. They had no fixed residence and were very mobile, so their houses were all tents that were easy to dismantle and move. Under such circumstances, the city walls were not very useful to them, so there were very few cities in the northern borderline. The so-called King City was built to show the uniqueness of the northern borderline's imperial court. It was specially built to imitate the capital of the Central Plains. To put it bluntly, it was just a shoddy construction. The third prince wept in his heart and complained, Lu Luo has fought many sieges. Can a mere king city really stop them? No matter what, they could not give up on the cavalry at the front. Slap. A loud slap sounded and a palm print appeared on the third prince's face. After a few breaths, half of his face swelled up. Boost the morale of others and diminish our own. Are you a spy sent by Luluo? If you want to die, I can grant you death. The sixth prince retracted his hand and said sinisterly, I am the acting king. I have the final say in everything. Now withdraw. The third prince looked at his brother in disbelief, his eyes full of shock and disappointment. The sixth prince gave the order to withdraw. Not long after, there was a knock on the door. They advanced at the sound of drums and retreated at the sound of metal. Fu Wang heard the movement and revealed a somewhat blood-stained smile. You want to withdraw now? It's too late. After saying that, he ordered the left and right wings to change their movements and sent another 20,000 soldiers from the middle army to cut off the northern borderline cavalry's retreat. The rest of the troops followed him to chase after the remnants of the northern borderline. They chased and fought along the way, eating up the enemy soldiers that were left behind bit by bit, chasing them all the way to the foot of the city. The bloody battle lasted until sunset before it gradually stopped. The orange-red setting sun shone on the earth, dyeing it with a desolate color. Monarch City stood on the horizon, but the city walls could not bring the slightest sense of security to the northern kingdom. The north borderline suffered heavy losses, while Jiang Pingji returned victorious. That was fun. Today's killing was really fun. Fu Wang's armor was drenched in blood, and the joints of his armor were stained with bits of flesh. He looked like a ferocious ghost that had crawled out of a mountain of corpses and a sea of blood. The most eye-catching thing was that he was holding two helmeted heads in his hands. No one felt that he had done a bad job at such a rude behavior. Instead, they were curious about the owner of the two heads. However, there was always an exception. Jiang Nongqin secretly frowned. General Fu, are you bringing these two heads here to offer them to my lord as a side dish? When they got slightly closer to Fu Wang, the soaring smell of blood almost suffocated them. Fu Wang's ability to command the three armies and kill two of the enemy's generals was not to be underestimated. The smile on Fu Wang's face froze for a moment. Seeing that the person who spoke was Jiang Nongqin, he could not retort. There were no women in the military camp. No one could be underestimated. Fu Wang did not have much contact with Jiang Nongqin, but he knew that she was not to be trifled with. Not to mention anything else, the female camp was in charge of the entire casualty camp. Perhaps one day his life would be on the line and he could count on her to save him. Officer Jiang, what kind of person is the Lord? How could she eat raw meat and drink blood like the barbarians? Jiang Nongqin said coldly, if that's the case, the general should find a box to put it in so as not to disturb the Lord. Fu Wang was speechless. Li Yun heard the conversation between the two. Seeing that Jiang Nongqin had left, he said, she cares a lot about the Lord. General, don't take it to heart. Fu Wang glanced at Li Yun with a hidden bitterness in his eyes, making him feel baffled. I understand. Is the Lord the most important? It was just a few words, but the sourness was enough to make a person fall down. Fu Wang was not angry at Jiang Nongqin, he was just touched by the scene. Huijuan's letters were always addressed to the Lord. Most of them were to report that she was safe or to send her regards. Occasionally she would also share the growth of the twins. Fu Wang even saw that there were two children's ink footprints on the letters. She would only mention his name in 3 to 5 letters. He was jealous and envious. He did not dare to hate. Huijun was like this, Jiang Nongqin was the same, and the other female soldiers in the female camp also worshipped the Lord like a god. Tisk, it's useless to like her. Just give up, the Lord is a woman. Fu Wang muttered softly. He ordered someone to prepare 2 boxes for him to place the enemy generals' heads. To the general, the enemy generals' heads were not just heads, but also meritorious deeds and glory. The value of these 2 heads could at least be exchanged for a lifetime of rouge and cosmetics for the precious daughter of Huijuan's family. Beheading the general's head was nothing. The biggest gain from this battle was the annihilation of the remaining cavalry of the north borderline and the capture of a large number of war horses. The undamaged war horses were kept as spoils of war, the seriously injured and disabled ones were kept as reserve rations, and the enemy's war horses that had died in battle were used as food. To be honest, the living conditions of the generals and soldiers were extremely difficult. They had attacked the north borderline for more than half a year and they could hardly eat meat. Fighting a war was tiring, but the heavy work of dealing with the aftermath was even more tiring. For example, when cleaning up the battlefield, the arrows that were lost had to be retrieved. Most of the swords, spears, swords, and halberds that were lost on the battlefield could be recycled and reused. The clothes and armor on the enemy's corpses could also be reused by sewing and mending them. There were also the heavy goods that the enemy camp did not have time to take away. In addition to these tasks, rescuing the wounded soldiers was an even more urgent matter. Half of the soldiers did not die on the battlefield, but because they did not receive timely treatment after the battle. Jiang Pingji turned off the streaming room and planned to take a bath in the main tent to clean up the blood on her body. Everyone was too busy. Clean hot water was needed for the wounded soldiers, so Jiang Pingji did not bother others. She directly exchanged a large basin of water from the system store and washed up. When she jumped into the bathtub wearing the innermost inner garment, the basin that was originally so clear that the bottom could be seen was instantly dyed red. After changing a few basins of water in a row, she was barely able to wash herself clean. Although the smell of blood still lingered around her body that could not be dispelled, it was much better than before. "My lord, Wei Xi requests to see you," Jiang Pingji said. "Zixiao, come in." The curtain of the tent was lifted and Wei Xi came in carrying a heavy food box. He walked around the simple screen and saw Jiang Pingji in a pine green gown. The belt was loosely tied and her long wet black hair was casually draped over her shoulders. Her face had a natural blush that was unique after a bath. Her dark eyes were bright and full of spirit. No one dared to look at her directly for fear of profaning her. Chapter 10:13. Wei Xi understood her. Once she was busy, she would not treat herself as a human. She would not eat unless someone reminded her. He could do whatever he wanted when he was young, but when he got older his spleen and stomach would suffer. Reminded by him, Jiang Pingji raised her hand to rub her stomach. She had not eaten for a few meals and was so hungry that she could not feel it. If Zixiao didn't mention it, I would have forgotten about it. Wei Xi could not help but laugh. He pulled the food table over and opened the food box. A rich aroma assailed his nostrils. The conditions of the barracks were poor and there were few fruits and vegetables in the north. The soldiers either ate dried rations or marinated jerky, which tasted terrible. There were quite a lot of spoils of war today. Wei Xi asked the cooks to leave him a few pieces of good meat with an appropriate amount of fat and lean meat, as well as some mountain dried goods that he had plundered. Jiang Pingji watched as Wei Xi took out the food from the food box. Smelling the aroma of the food, her stomach started to rumble. The chef doesn't have such good skills. Could it be that Zixiao specially made it for me? The chef only knew how to cook in large pots of rice and dishes. He could only ensure that the food was clean and did not care about the taste. Sometimes the food was half-cooked and the soldiers could only bite the bullet and eat it. The food that Wei Xi brought out was different. Disregarding the taste, just looking at the color and smelling the aroma was enough to make one's thumb twitch. Other than the Lord, I have never cooked for anyone else. Eat it while it's hot. Wei Xi filled her bowl with rice and fetched a pair of bamboo chopsticks. I haven't cooked for a long time. I don't know if my skills have gotten rusty. If you don't like it, I'll get someone to prepare another serving. Jiang Pingji took the bowl and chopsticks. She looked up at Wei Xi as she ate the rice. Why is my lord looking at Xi like that? Wei Xi scooped a bowl of mushroom soup for her to eat. It's not good to always eat meat, it's easy to get sick of it. Jiang Pingji smiled and said, a feast for the eyes. I can only eat when I look at Zixiao. Wei Xi could not stop smiling bitterly. Even though the knot in his heart had been resolved, his lord's seductive methods always caught him off guard. I didn't expect that I would be of such use, Wei Xi continued readily. In that case, my lord, please eat a few more bowls. Although that was what he said, in his heart he thought, what a glib tongue. If his face was so good at eating, why didn't His Majesty eat on time in the past? Why did he have to coax His Majesty with good words? Now that he recalled it, Wei Xi came up with an absurd conjecture. Could it be that Her Majesty didn't have a bad appetite and just wanted him to coax her? If Zixiao eats with me, I can eat with more relish. Xi has already eaten. Wei Xi smiled and refilled her bowl. His gaze was as gentle as water. Jiang Pingji finished the food prepared by Wei Xi without wasting a grain of rice or a drop of soup. Her plate was brighter than her face. With Zixiao's craftsmanship, he should be able to get married. Wei Xi said, no hurry, there are still a few more years. Jiang Pingji looked at Wei Xi's lips and subconsciously licked her dry lips. Zixiao, Did you prepare dessert? Wei Xi was stunned. Although his lord was not a picky eater, she did not like food that was overly sweet and rarely touched desserts. Not yet. Without waiting for him to finish speaking, he saw her right hand move as fast as lightning and press the back of his neck to her. The two of them directly fell onto the table. Although Jiang Pingji had a lot of theoretical knowledge when it came to real combat, she seemed to only know how to gnaw. After a while, Wei Xi left the main tent with the empty food box. His originally pale lips were as red as fire, as if they could drip blood. When he met Qiguanrang, he bowed his head slightly and hurriedly greeted him. Qiguanrang was speechless. Qiguanrang happened to have something to discuss with Jiang Pingji. Seeing his lord's expression and thinking of Wei Xi's embarrassed look, he could not help but laugh. Wei Xi was 26 years old and his lord was almost 20. At this age, if they moved a little faster, their children could go to the Golden Scale Academy. Yet the two of them were extremely naive. My lord, I found out the identities of those two people. Qiguanrang gathered his thoughts and resumed his official state. Their identities? Jiang Pingji was stunned for a moment, then immediately remembered who Qiguanrang was referring to. What identities? Jiang Pingji had captured the two people alive. Just by looking at their armors, she could tell that they were of extraordinary status. Perhaps they were important figures in the northern borderline. She could not be bothered to waste time and directly left the matter to Qiguanrang to handle. She hurriedly returned to the tent to wash up and change her clothes. The two of them were stubborn and kept their identities a secret. I couldn't get anything out of them through interrogation. However, Zidao has seen them and knows their identities. When Qiguanrang said this, the smile on his face grew wider. Both of them are princes of the northern borderline. One is the 7th and the other is the 8th. The princes of the northern borderline? Jiang Pingji was shocked and said in astonishment, the king of the northern borderline, that old tortoise, is quite fertile. His fertility was quite strong. Jiang Pingji killed the 2nd prince as a sacrifice to the flag and also slaughtered the 9th prince. She left his corpse hanging to deal a blow to the morale of the northern borderline. Sun Wen killed with a borrowed knife and used the 9th prince to kill the 4th prince of the northern borderline. In this way she had killed 3 princes of the northern borderline and now captured 2 more. There were too many princes of the northern borderline. They were not valuable at all. Qiguanrang was choked by his lord's description. However, the king of the northern borderline was indeed fertile. His lord was his nemesis. She was destined to end the royal family's bloodline. How does my lord intend to deal with the two of them? Jiang Pingji thought about it. We're a family. We pay particular attention to reunion. Send them down to meet their other brothers. Qiguanrang frowned. His lord's words meant that she did not intend to let the two of them go. Kill them now. If we kill them now, won't it be too easy for the northern borderline? Jiang Pingji thought about it and came up with an idea. She said, strip them naked, tie them up and hang them on the arrow tower. I remember that the 2nd prince of the northern borderline was also treated like this. They're all brothers. We can't be biased. She then added, by the way, before we do this, Wenjing, draft a letter and tell the royal court of the northern borderline that if they want to exchange for the two of them, they only need to tie up the royal family and surrender. If they are unwilling, then they can open their eyes and watch. If it was any other time, she could use the captives to exchange for benefits, but Jiang Pingji did not intend to let the northern borderline go. Instead of releasing them, it was better to use them to attack the morale of the northern borderline and give them mental pressure. Qiguanrang said, yes. In another place, the 8th prince, who had been reduced to a prisoner, finally woke up. Seeing that the 8th prince was showing signs of waking up, the 7th prince hurriedly called out, 8th brother, wake up. The 8th prince slowly woke up. He only felt that his throat was dry, as if there was a fire burning there. Seventh brother. Where is this? The 8th prince moved his body and found that his hands were tightly tied with ropes. A sharp pain came from his lower limbs. In an instant, the memories from before he fainted swarmed in. Chapter 10:14. 7th prince said sadly, we were captured by that traitor Lu, and now we're his prisoners. His injuries were serious. The arrow wound on his shoulder was filthy. If it wasn't taken care of, it might even rot. 8th prince's heart skipped a beat. He couldn't believe this reality. We were captured. He wasn't a naive person. If he fell into the enemy's hands, he could imagine what would happen to him. Seventh prince nodded heavily. Yes. If that's the case. Eighth prince hurriedly asked, is there any movement from the imperial court? He and seventh prince were both princes of the imperial court. They represented the face and dignity of the imperial court. If they were humiliated, the imperial court would lose face as well. The imperial court wouldn't allow the enemy to humiliate them. They would definitely send someone to negotiate with that traitor Lu and negotiate terms for the two of them. The seventh prince knew what the eighth prince was thinking. After a while, he shook his head slowly and rejected the eighth prince's hopes. He said sadly, Lu Buwei has no intention of seeing us. The imperial court is controlled by the sixth prince. He can't wait for us to die. Why would he send someone to redeem us? Seventh prince had been supporting eighth prince for free. Eighth prince was a strong contender to replace the king. The two of them were sixth prince's biggest problem. Why would he give up his interests in exchange for them? Little did he know that the imperial court was in an uproar. Sixth prince hadn't slept for 2 days. He was afraid that if he closed his eyes, the enemy would break into the imperial court. He hadn't slept for a long time. His nerves were extremely fragile. The officials below him were still chattering, making his head hurt. So noisy. Apart from arguing, is there anyone who can help me? The sixth prince's emotional outburst and his angry voice silenced the officials for a moment, not daring to make a sound. Stand up and say it. Sixth prince pointed at a random official. If you can't give me a good explanation, I'll take your life. The officials were silent. No one dared to stand up. Only sixth prince's father-in-law dared to stand up. He was in the pro-war faction. His only son Hakai had died on the battlefield. He wanted to avenge his son. Sixth prince felt a bit guilty facing his father-in-law. He suppressed his violent emotions and listened to him patiently. Father-in-law's entire speech only had one main point: war. As for strategies, he didn't mention anything. He was a brute with muscles in his head. Fight. Fight with what? Use your head to fight Thief Lu? They had already been cornered by Thief Lu into King City. They were as cowardly as tortoises with low morale. There was no way they could win. The sixth prince resisted the urge to vomit blood in his heart. On the surface, he still had to calm his father-in-law. He still needed to rely on this father-in-law. Reporting to the acting king, an arrow was shot from outside the city, and there's a letter from that traitor Lu on it. The sixth prince perked up and hurriedly said, quickly read it out. Let's see what it says. There were not many officials of the northern frontier who knew the Chinese language. In the end, they could only pass the letter to the third prince and let him read it on their behalf. The third prince opened the letter and read it. His face was as gloomy as ink, and he seemed to have something stuck in his throat, unable to say a single word. Third brother, even you are going to disobey my orders? The sixth prince was enraged and his breathing quickened. His chest rose and fell violently as he panted like a bull. The third prince was stunned for a moment before he read out the contents with difficulty. The seventh prince and the eighth prince had already become the prisoners of the Lu family. If the royal court of the northern borderline wanted to redeem them, they had to open the city and surrender. Not only that, the royal court would also become prisoners. If they agreed to this condition, she would only clean up the royal court and not hurt the other nobles. This was Jiang Pingji's ultimatum. If the north borderline did not know what was good for them, then they should not blame her for being ruthless. Scram. All of you scram. The sixth prince lost control of his emotions. He rose from his throne and strode towards the third prince. He snatched the letter from the third prince's hand and tore it into pieces. Who does she think she is? How dare you threaten us like this? North Border Imperial Dynasty was the most noble race in North Border. According to their genealogical records, they were the descendants of the gods that the northern borderline believed in. Their bloodline was extremely noble. Don't think that only the aristocratic families of the Central Plains were particular about bloodlines. The barbarians of the northern borders were even more concerned about bloodlines. The northern border imperial court was the descendant of the gods. They were born to control the living beings of the earth. How could mere mortals control their life and death? Ridiculous. However, to put it bluntly, the descendants of gods and whatnot was just putting gold on their faces. If not for that, how could the imperial court suppress the other families in North Border and become the royal family? The third prince looked at the sixth prince's crazy and furious expression and asked coldly, "If they don't agree, what will happen to the seventh and eighth princes?" The sixth prince angrily pulled out the dagger at his waist and said to the third prince, "I am the acting king. You are just officials. Instead of helping me solve my problems, you are asking me what to do? Trash. All of you are trash. What use do I have for trash like you?" The third prince looked at him coldly. He knew that the brother in front of him was about to go crazy. The court was in chaos. Everyone was arguing, but they had no idea what to do. The next day, a mobile arrow tower was pushed to a place a few hundred steps away from the royal city. Two naked people were hanging on it. They were the half-dead seventh prince and the eighth prince. Two long banners were hanging around their necks. There were a few big words written on them. One of the banners said, "When the two princes die." The other banners said, "When our army breaks into the city, you will all be beheaded." The Liu family's emblem was drawn at the end of the banners. It was full of arrogance. When the guards on the walls of the royal city saw this, they were so scared that their legs turned to jelly. They hurriedly sent the news back to the imperial court. The sixth prince sat there in a daze. His face was so dark that he couldn't look at it anymore. The officials arguing under the tent couldn't make him come back to his senses. "Acting king, I am willing to go to war. Instead of being humiliated, it is better to regroup and go out of the city to fight to the death with the Liu traitor." The father-in-law wanted to avenge his son, who was the only seedling of his bloodline. Now that his only son was dead, it was equivalent to having no descendants. Instead of being humiliated by the enemy, it was better to go out and fight to his heart's content. The father-in-law was willing to fight to the death for the royal family, but the other nobles were not willing. Why should they die if they could live? How much was courage worth? They didn't care about etiquette, righteousness, honor, filial piety, loyalty, and trust. As long as they were alive, they could continue to enjoy glory and wealth. It was just a change of master that they were loyal to. If surrendering could save their lives, why would they want to die with the royal family? "Why don't we surrender?" an old official said anxiously. His voice wasn't loud, but it attracted everyone's attention. He plucked up his courage and said, "Now that the Liu traitor is like the sun in the sky, it's only a matter of time before he breaks the city. Instead of increasing casualties, it is better to." Before he finished speaking, a white light flashed in the air. He felt a chill on his neck and hot blood splattered on the ground. The third prince sheathed his sword and said with a gloomy expression, "Surrendering before the battle. Are you still the unyielding men of the northern borderline?" Chapter 10:15. The third prince's words made all the officials blush. They were not ashamed but angry. If they surrendered, they would at least have a way to live. This was called, "A wise man submits to circumstances." How could it be called having no backbone? But no one dared to say so lest the third prince suddenly kill them. After the court was dismissed, the officials left in twos and threes. Everyone's expression was not very good. The royal family wanted them to die with them. How could their expressions be good? The sky gradually darkened. The originally bustling royal city was now lonely and cold, filled with a somber atmosphere. The temperature difference between day and night in the northern kingdom was relatively large. The sun was scorching during the day and the moonlight was as cold as ice at night. The seventh prince and the eighth prince were both injured, and they were tied up violently and hung on the tall archer tower. Not to mention their serious injuries, the enemy didn't even give them water to drink or food to eat. Even if their bodies were made of iron, they wouldn't be able to withstand it, let alone the two of them who had been pampered for more than 20 years. The eighth prince weakly called out, "Seventh brother, are you still awake?" He had been unconscious for most of the day. Now his head was very heavy, his body was hot and cold, and the scene in front of him was bright and dark. The seventh prince hung in midair with his head down and did not respond at all. But his body was still warm, so he should not be dead. The eighth prince was very sad. He was hung in midair and could faintly see the inside of royal city through the high wall. Not long ago he was still a galloping, high-spirited prince of the northern kingdom, but now he was a prisoner of the enemy. His body was tied up and hung in public. It was a great humiliation. When he was young, he often imagined his future. In the blueprint he described, he would always be a person of high status. When did he ever think of becoming a prisoner? If it was any other time, he would have tried to commit suicide after suffering such humiliation. How could he live in this world? But both he and the seventh prince knew the contents of the long note hanging around their necks and knew that they were related to the day that Thief Lu would attack the city. As long as they lived a little longer, maybe the officials of Royal City could come up with a strategy to deal with the enemy? Maybe they still had a chance to live? The eighth prince knew that the possibility was very slim, but it was better than no hope. Whether it was him or the seventh brother, they had to work hard to survive and must not let the enemy have his way. Thus, the eighth prince tried to call out to the seventh prince while he was still conscious, until the seventh prince woke up. They could not sleep because they might not be able to wake up again. During the long night, the two of them were so cold that their bodies turned blue. When the sun rose and the warm sunlight sprinkled on their bodies, they were almost moved to tears. Was it cruel? Compared to the evil deeds they had committed, Jiang Pingji was very merciful. She did not treat the two of them as pets and let them fight with wild beasts. She did not let the two of them have sex with wild beasts and take pleasure in it. She also did not let people humiliate their wives and daughters in front of them and amuse them by listening to their painful cries. She had done nothing, but they had done everything. The northern borderline plundered and captured countless people at the border. Men and women, which one of them had a good ending. The seventh prince ran a trading company and had sold countless Han women. When those women fell into the hands of the slave trading company, how could they be innocent and not be humiliated? There were too many violent and perverted nobles in the northern borderline. How could the number of Han female slaves who were played to death every day be few? The status of women in the northern borderline was indeed high, but it was only limited to the barbarian women of the northern borderline. The Han women were inferior to dogs. The seventh prince was an executioner, but the eighth prince was not innocent. One year, the seventh prince was seriously ill and could not recover. The doctor in the northern borderline said that to cure the illness, he had to remove the cornell from the chests of 10 clean young girls and boil them until they became fragrant minced meat. Then, with the medicine prescribed by the doctor, he would recover after taking it for 10 days. Therefore, the eighth prince spent a lot of money to buy 100 young girls from the trading company. The oldest was no more than 15 and the youngest was no more than 7 or 8 years old. According to the doctor's instructions, the seventh prince recovered after taking it for 10 days. After knowing what the eighth prince had done for him, the seventh prince not only did not feel that it was cruel, but he was grateful for the brotherly love. Compared to what they had done, was it cruel for Jiang Pingji to hang them in the air to dry? Are they dead? Jiang Pingji had a good sleep. The next day she was refreshed, not at all like she had been fighting on the battlefield for a whole day. The civil and military officials looked at her with jealousy. Their lord was full of energy and her physical strength was beyond that of a normal person. Sun Wen sneered and replied, "They're still breathing. They're lucky to be hanging like this." The war in the northern borderline had been going on for long enough. He had not seen his grandson Lon Lon for more than half a year. Jiang Pingji pointed at the table and asked Sun Wen, "Wait for 2 more days. Let the generals and soldiers rest well." Sun Wen asked with a smile, "What if the northern borderline surrenders?" Jiang Pingji said, "If the northern borderline is willing to surrender, it depends on whether I am willing to accept it or not." From the beginning to the end, she had never intended to accept the surrender of the northern borderline. She had asked Wen Jing to write that letter just to play with the northern borderline. Wasn't the seventh prince and the eighth prince not willing to swallow their anger just to buy time? If they found out that their hard work was in vain, they would definitely feel bitter. The people of the northern borderline are innocent, but their rich and powerful are not. They will only be a disaster if they are kept alive. Jiang Pingji's eyes were cold and flashed with a cold, murderous intent. The people are easy to deal with. As long as you ensure that they do not have to worry about food and clothing, they will be deeply grateful. But the rich and powerful are different. Their greed and desires are endless. If we accept their surrender, it will be difficult to deal with them in the future. Instead of keeping them alive and becoming a disaster, we don't know when they will cause trouble for others. It is better to completely strangle them early on to avoid future worries. Sun Wen deeply agreed with this. If the rich and powerful of the northern borderline were kept alive, they could use their previous foundation to secretly stir up trouble. As long as they had a foundation, it would be easier to recover. This was a disaster. Their lord was someone who had her eyes on the world. How could she waste her energy on lowly people? Jiang Pingji said to Sun Wen, "If they are still unwilling to die when the time comes, Then give them a quick death and send them on their way. Sun Wen nodded in agreement. Time flew and another day passed. Jiang Pingji's army surrounded the royal city. Although they did not curse, they gave them endless pressure. The imperial court had not made a decision. Seeing that the 7th prince and the 8th prince could not hold on any longer, the nobles of the northern borderline were ready to make a move. They could not wait any longer. Jiang Pingji was about to rest when familiar footsteps came from outside the tent, followed by a familiar voice. "My lord, are you asleep?" Jiang Pingji got up and lit a candle. He said, "Zixiao, come in." "What's the matter?" After getting permission, Wei Ci opened the tent curtain and entered. He saw his lord holding an oil lamp. Half of her face was dyed a warm orange by the dim candlelight. Her brows looked even more gentle. Wei Ci saw that she was dressed rather neatly. He lowered his head slightly and reported, "There is movement in the royal city of the northern borderline." Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and frowned. She asked him, "What movement?" Chapter 10:16. The confidant of the right chief minister of the northern borderline? Jiang Pingji thought for a moment and said, "Sneaking down the city wall in the middle of the night. It seems that the right chief minister is quite tactful." "A wise man submits to circumstances," Wei Ci said. "Whether he is a wise man or not, it's up to me to decide." Jiang Pingji's eyes flashed with coldness. She smiled and said, "I'll go take a look at this person." Jiang Pingji sat on the seat of honor. The candle in the tent was lit and barely illuminated half of the space. A person was kneeling below. His upper body was almost touching the ground. Jiang Pingji pouted when she saw his trembling appearance. "I don't want to know your name. You just need to tell me why you're here." Jiang Pingji pulled over a chair and leaned half of her body against it. She looked lazy and sleepy. "It's getting late. It's not good for your health if you sleep too late." The person choked and his expression was slightly distorted. He said, "I am the confidant of the right chief minister, Zhou Xian. Today I'm here to surrender under the right chief minister's order." "Surrender?" Jiang Pingji sneered. She said, "Although I don't know who Zhou Xian is, since he's the right chief minister, he must be one of the most powerful people in the northern borderline. I have a question. Your right chief minister has been receiving the salary of the northern borderline for so many years. Now that the northern borderline is facing a disaster, he betrays and surrenders just like that. It's hard to not be suspicious." The person said, "The right chief minister said that there's a widespread saying in the Central Plains. A good bird chooses a tree to nest in, a virtuous minister chooses a master to serve. The northern borderline's tyranny is harsh and makes the people have no way to live. It's obvious that he's not a wise ruler. The right chief minister can't bear to help the evildoer." Jiang Pingji smiled and praised him. "Your right chief minister is quite knowledgeable about Han culture. What he said is good." The person was delighted and quickly said, "Magistrate Liu, you're too kind." Jiang Pingji changed her posture and tried to make herself more comfortable. "It's not impossible to surrender. But how do I know that your right chief minister is sincere?" Jiang Pingji sneered and said mercilessly, "Not long ago the northern borderline ordered a tribe to pretend to surrender. If it wasn't for my wise strategist who saw through the northern borderline's plot, I might have been the one to return in defeat. It's fine if you want to surrender, but you need to show some sincerity." Without sincerity, could it still be considered as defecting? The man was overjoyed and quickly took out a tightly wrapped piece of parchment from his lapel. "This is the topographic map of Royal City. I present it to Governor Liu." A look of joy appeared on the man's face as he said, "The right minister is already fully prepared. As long as you accept our surrender, the right minister will coordinate with you from the inside and the outside. We will take the opportunity to open the gates of King City and welcome the army into the city." Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and asked the man, "Really?" "Absolutely." At the same time, the right minister was anxiously waiting for news at home, like an ant on a hot pan. His trusted aide had been gone for 4 hours. Why hadn't there been any news yet? "Right minister, who are you waiting for?" Footsteps could be heard from outside the tent. Torches were lit up and a familiar voice was heard. Right Prime Minister Zhou Xian felt a chill in his heart and quickly turned his head to look. The person who came was the haggard-looking third prince, and there were many people following behind him. He recalled the question asked by the third prince and was shocked. He quickly said, "Your Highness, I'm not waiting for anyone." The third prince sat boldly on the seat of honor. The corners of his mouth curled into a sinister smile. He stared at the right minister as if he was looking at a dead man. "You're not waiting for anyone?" The third prince said pointedly. "I was patrolling the streets just now and caught a trusted aide who claimed to be the right minister. He even hid the topographic map of King City." I was shocked. The right minister was loyal to the northern borderline. How could he betray the enemy? I was too angry, so I ordered people to interrogate him. That person didn't live up to expectations and died. To prevent the right minister's reputation from being tarnished, I specially brought people over to question him. If that person framed me, I can clear the right minister's name so that no one can use this to attack the right minister. After the third prince said this, the right minister's plump body could not help but tremble slightly. His front and back were covered in sticky sweat. He said decisively, "I was born a man of the northern borderline and I will die a ghost of the northern borderline. My loyalty can be seen by the heavens. What trusted aide who had the topographic map of King City? Someone must be jealous of me and deliberately framed me. The third prince is wise and won't be deceived by vile people." The third prince's lips curled up slightly. He said, "The right minister is also an old man of 2 dynasties. You are my father's right-hand man. I naturally trust you." The right minister nodded repeatedly, fully demonstrating what servile meant. The third prince sneered in his heart. That old man. The third prince made up his mind and continued, "Although the right minister was slandered, he is not completely innocent. In the future, you have to restrain your subordinates and don't let others take advantage of the loopholes. I have already killed that trusted aide and sent someone to bring this topographic map to Lu Bue." The right minister opened his eyes wide in shock. It seemed that he did not hear what the third prince said. "The dagger is revealed." The third prince said in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "Whether it is success or failure, it all depends on today. As long as Jiang Pingji died, no, even if she was only seriously injured, the northern borderline could take the opportunity to catch their breath." The right minister's mouth was dry. He was so scared that he broke out in a cold sweat. He looked at the third prince with respect and fear. The third prince left the right minister's residence, but his expression did not relax. Instead, it was so serious that it could drip water. The sixth prince was the acting king, but he was useless. He did not have the ability to suppress the officials. The hearts of the people in the court were wavering. Many people already had the idea of surrendering. They would make their move in a day or two. The third prince simply brought people to wait for them. Sure enough, they caught many of them. "Master, is the northern borderline really doomed?" The third prince was filled with unwillingness. "I don't believe it." Because of his unwillingness, he used the trick of sending his trusted aide to pretend to be the right minister's aide and take the opportunity to assassinate Lu Shi. If he succeeded, once Lu Shi was dead, the enemy would definitely retreat. The northern borderline would still have room to counterattack. If he failed, Lu Shi had learned his lesson. Let's see if he still dared to accept the nobles from the northern borderline who surrendered. Maybe they would be killed as soon as the messenger expressed his intentions. These nobles enjoyed the benefits given by the royal family. Now that disaster was upon them, they wanted to fly away alone? In their dreams. If the northern borderline was doomed, the royal family was destined to be destroyed. These people would be buried with the royal family. Crazy thoughts occupied his mind. The third prince looked calm on the surface, but his heart was already crazy. Outside the royal city in Jiang Pingji's camp. "Hand over the item. If it's true, your right minister will be rewarded handsomely." Jiang Pingji pointed at the table in front of her. The man bowed and stepped forward, holding the topographic map of the royal city in both hands. The man was less than 5 steps away from Jiang Pingji. She suddenly asked, "Oh right, your right minister is so knowledgeable. Has he heard of a word in the Han family?" "What word?" Chapter 10:17. When the assassin heard the words, "The dagger will be revealed," his eyes widened and his expression became ferocious. He immediately drew his sharp blade and pounced on Jiang Pingji. The snow-white blade drew a white light in the air. They were less than 5 steps apart. If he could seize the opportunity to kill this person, it would be worth it even if he had to sacrifice his life. However, Jiang Pingji was not a weakling. She would not be chased around the tent and run for her life. She kicked the table in front of her away. The small table flew towards the assassin. The assassin did not dodge. He pounced on Jiang Pingji and let the table fall on him. He knew that he only had one chance. If he missed it, he would not have another chance to kill Jiang Pingji. Moreover, it was just a table. How painful could it be if it fell on him? If not for Jiang Pingji, the assassin's judgment would not have been wrong. He could even be considered decisive. Unfortunately, the assassin's target was Jiang Pingji. She could not be measured by common sense. A ceremonial tablet in her hands could become a weapon that could dismember a corpse. How could a table be less lethal than a ceremonial tablet in her hands? The assassin only had his target in his eyes. The dagger in his hand was already aimed at Jiang Pingji's chest. At the same time, the table flew over and accurately hit the assassin's chest. In the next moment, the table made a cracking sound. The table's legs were split into pieces. Wood chips flew everywhere. The assassin felt that he had not been hit by a table. He had clearly been hit by a small mountain. Several of his sternum had been broken in an instant. Because of the huge force of the attack, he was sent flying backward for more than 10 feet. He fell to the ground like a rag doll. His internal organs were shattered. Sticky blood gushed up his throat and filled his mouth. Half of his face was a bloody mess. Jiang Pingji stood up leisurely. Her expression was calm as usual. The strategist in the tent was speechless. Everything had ended before it had even begun. Fengzhen maintained his posture of pouncing forward. His expression was frozen in an awkward angle. He looked comical and awkward. Although Wei Xi's expression was not as exaggerated, the nervousness and worry on his face were not fake. His pale and pretty lips were stained with a layer of white. My lord. Fengzhen looked at the sawdust on the ground in disbelief. He couldn't believe his eyes. This table was not made of wood. It was clearly made of pure gold and silver. Otherwise, how could it have such destructive power? Jiang Pingji's eyes were cold. She looked at the assassin without any warmth. The assassin was hit head-on by the table, and his entire body was sent flying for more than 10 feet. His sternum was almost completely shattered, and his internal organs were pierced through by the shattered sternum. It seemed that he would not survive for long. What are you shouting for? Call someone over to clean up his body. I'll have nightmares if I leave it here. Fengzhen, nightmare? My lord, are you serious? Fengzhen came back to his senses. He realized that he was so scared that he was breaking out in a cold sweat. The front and back of his shirt were already soaked. The scene just now was too thrilling. The distance between the lord and the assassin was less than 5 steps. It was a real life and death moment. If Jiang Pingji was killed, the great undertaking that had just begun would be forced to stop. The 3 armies were like a group of dragons without a leader, allowing the northern borderline to take advantage of them. The guards outside heard the commotion and rushed into the tent. They saw the paralyzed assassin on the ground and hurriedly half-knelt to ask for forgiveness. Jiang Pingji's expression softened slightly. She said, "It's okay. You just have to drag this person away. Wait, leave this map behind." She picked up the map of the interior of the royal city. 4 guards each grabbed one of the assassin's limbs and carried him out. If it wasn't for the large pool of undried blood on the ground, who would have guessed that an assassination had happened in the tent? The guards went out. Wei Ci stepped forward to ask for forgiveness. No matter what, he was the one who brought the assassin to Jiang Pingji. He had failed to identify the assassin. He was guilty of negligence. Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows. This is not Zixiao's fault. Even if there were 100 assassins, they wouldn't be able to hurt me, let alone one. Fengzhen, who was beside her, also tried to persuade her. The northern borderline refuses to give up. I thought that they were an arrow at the end of its flight. I didn't expect them to still have the strength to resist. Although Zixiao is at fault, it wasn't the main cause. Since my lord has already forgiven him, Zixiao shouldn't be too concerned. Jiang Pingji couldn't change Wei Ci's mind. She could only symbolically forfeit his salary for 3 months. Wei Ci felt that the punishment was too light and tried to make her make it more severe. The most important thing now isn't to pursue your crimes. The northern borderline is the main culprit. Jiang Pingji frowned impatiently. Her tone was slightly nasty. If Zixiao really feels that he has made a mistake, I'll settle it with you in the future. As for now, there's no hurry. The news of Jiang Pingji's assassination quickly reached Sun Wen and Qiguan Rang's ears. The 2 of them rushed over and found that the main tent was neatly arranged. It was not as chaotic as they had imagined. I heard that my lord was attacked by an assassin. Are you all right? Qiguan Rang's expression was still calm, but his clothes were a little crooked. It was obvious that he had rushed over in a hurry. His breathing was also a little hurried. Jiang Pingji mocked him mercilessly. No. If assassins are all at this level, it'd be strange if they could hurt me. Hearing this, Sun Wen decisively swallowed his questions. Needless to say, his lord was definitely not the one who was at a disadvantage. Zidao, look at this map of the royal city. Jiang Pingji handed the map that the assassin had brought over to Sun Wen. Sun Wen took a few glances at it and could roughly determine its authenticity. I'm at least 80% sure that the map is real. In order to assassinate my lord, the northern borderline has put in a lot of effort. They actually used a real map as bait. Sun Wen mumbled. Jiang Pingji responded with a cold smile. What do you mean by putting in a lot of effort? If that's the case, the right chief minister is really pitiful. Sun Wen frowned. The assassin used the right chief minister of the northern borderline as an excuse? The northern borderline had always looked down on the Han family of the Central Plains. They were very hostile toward them. The right chief minister of the northern borderline was a typical example. I forgot to mention that the left chief minister of the northern borderline was Wu Liba. Unlike the Central Plains where the right was respected, the northern borderline had always respected the left. That's not all. Jiang Pingji said with certainty. In my opinion, the right chief minister most likely sincerely wanted to defect, so the map he brought was also real. But he never expected that the messenger he sent would be intercepted halfway and replaced. Jiang Pingji became vigilant when she saw the assassin. This was because the assassin had developed a murderous intent towards her. If it was someone who truly defected, that person might have evil intentions, but he would never dare to have murderous intent. Jiang Pingji also discovered that the assassin's clothes did not fit him very well. They looked wrinkled and wrinkled. Others would think that they were wrinkled from squatting, so they looked messy. However, Jiang Pingji had a good grasp of the measurements. She knew in her heart whether the clothes were not neatly dressed or not fitting. The assassin's clothes were very likely not his own. Chapter 10:18. Jiang Pingji praised the right minister for his knowledge of Han culture. The assassin said compliments from the magistrate of Liuzhou, but his eyes showed some disdain. This disdain was not directed at Jiang Pingji but at the right minister. According to her speculation, the real messenger should have been intercepted and killed. Because the assassin and the messenger were similar in size, and to be safe, the assassin wore the messenger's clothes, carried the real blueprint and went to the capital in a bamboo basket. He disguised himself as the messenger and tried to assassinate Jiang Pingji. She did not suspect much about the real master of the assassin. Jiang Pingji briefly explained her speculation. Sun Wen pondered for a while and already had a suspect in his heart. It's probably the third prince's man, Sun Wen said. The third prince of the northern borderline studied under Wu Liba. This pair of master and disciple are rare smart people in the northern borderline. Because of Wu Liba's influence, the third prince is quite knowledgeable about Han culture. However, he also learned his master's temper. He's stubborn and arrogant, but he's loyal to the northern borderline. There shouldn't be anyone else besides him who could come up with an assassination plan at this juncture. If it wasn't for the Lord's outstanding martial arts, she might have failed miserably. The northern borderline was now an arrow at the end of its flight, and the nobles were fence-sitters. The possibility of them secretly defecting to the enemy was extremely high. She never expected that someone would intercept the messenger and impersonate her to assassinate Jiang Pingji. Whether it's this person or not, I'll put this on his head. Someone had to take the blame for this matter. The third prince was the most suspicious person. If he didn't take the blame, who would? I have to thank him. It just so happens that I have a ready-made excuse to slaughter all the nobles in the northern borderline. As long as there was a good reason, the massacre was not a big deal. Not to mention slaughtering all the nobles in the northern borderline in Guizhou, even killing more would be justifiable. Other than that, the nobles in the northern borderline were the richest. Plundering their family's wealth would fill up Jiang Pingji's private treasury. The enemy had given her a ready-made excuse. If she didn't make good use of it, wouldn't she be letting herself down? The veins on Sun Wen's eyebrows twitched. He glanced at the other three and realized that they were indifferent to the slaughter Jiang Pingji mentioned. Recalling Qiguan Rang Wuxia and Fengzhen's conduct, he felt that the Lord was so lawless, more or less because they connived her. Even if he really wanted to slaughter them and plunder their wealth, he couldn't just say it out loud. However, the Lord was willful and the subordinates indulged her. Sun Wen could only turn a blind eye to it. It's too late today. Go and rest first. Send people to keep an eye on the movements in Royal City. If anyone defected again, capture them all. There is still a tough battle to fight. The nobles of the northern borderline know that there is no hope of defecting, so they will definitely find another way out. After a brief discussion, Jiang Pingji saw the sleep scars on Sun Wen and Qiguan Rang's faces. Her heart softened and she chased them away to sleep. Fengzhen and the others took their leave. Wuxia also prepared to get up and leave, but he had barely taken 2 steps when he realized that his sleeve was being tugged at. Wuxia glanced at his sleeve. His line of sight followed the hand on the sleeve and moved up, just in time to meet his lord's eyes. At this time Fengzhen and the other 2 had already left the main tent. "My lord," Jiang Pingji said, "didn't I say that I'll settle this with you in the future?" She purposely emphasized a certain word. Regardless of whether it was his previous life or his current one, Wuxia had always been a person of great virtue. He was like a wisp of bright moon and cool breeze. When had he ever come into contact with such vulgar language? Therefore Wuxia was stunned for a while before he understood Jiang Pingji's hint. At that moment he felt all the blood in his body rush to his head. His ears started to hallucinate. "My lord, how can you say such vulgar words?" Wuxia did not believe that Jiang Pingji would mess around in the military camp. However, he could not just say flowery words, let alone such vulgar words. How could words and actions be the same? Jiang Pingji smiled and teased him. "What vulgar? Is it the end?" Wuxia was speechless. This was definitely not the His Majesty he knew. However, Wuxia had forgotten that even the His Majesty in his memory was Fengzhen's gang of scoundrels. He drank with women and visited brothels. At this moment, Jiang Pingji was just destroying Wuxia's inner image of a god. She wanted him to know that the god in his heart was also a person. After a while, Wuxia left the main tent with a conflicted expression and returned to his own tent. Not long after he left, a swift black shadow followed him back to the tent. The patrolling soldiers did not notice it at all. Wuxia looked at Jiang Pingji and sighed again and again. "My lord, you have to go back once the sky is bright so as not to cause panic among the people." Wuxia did not have the ability to sneak out of the main tent without arousing suspicion, but Jiang Pingji could sneak out of Wuxia's tent without being discovered. It was obvious that there was nothing going on between them, but they still acted like they were having an affair. Wuxia was also mentally exhausted. Jiang Pingji did not care so much. The weather was still hot. Wuxia's body temperature was relatively low. It was comfortable to hold him. She had a good night's sleep. The third prince, who was still waiting for news, was in despair. If the assassination was successful, the camp of the traitor Lu would be in chaos. However, after one night, the order of the camp remained the same. It could be seen that the confidant he sent out had failed in the assassination. Rubbing his sore and swollen eyes, the third prince walked with heavy steps to the court with a pair of reddened eyes and a green stubble. Not only did the third prince not sleep for the whole night, but half of the ministers in the court could not sleep either. They looked at the third prince with trepidation. They were afraid that he would spread the news that they had secretly colluded with the enemy. If that happened, they would die in the hands of their own people before Jiang Pingji attacked. What was surprising was that the third prince maintained his silence. He looked at the quarrel in the court coldly, like a wooden man. Many old ministers earnestly persuaded the sixth prince. "Acting prince, in my opinion, we should surrender to the traitor Lu now. At least we can preserve some of our descendants so that we can make a comeback in the future." The sixth prince was so angry that he laughed. If they surrendered, the royal family of the northern borderline would definitely be slaughtered. The ministers in front of him could turn around and beg for mercy and flatter the traitor Lu. At the very least, they could preserve their glory and wealth. On what basis? On what basis? The royal family was nobler than them. On what basis should they use the blood of the royal family in exchange for the survival of these lowly people? Anger brewed in the sixth prince's heart. Half of the ministers in the court were inclined to surrender. They could not help but be anxious. The seventh and eighth princes had already reached their limits. In other words, There was not much time left for the northern borderline. If they did not make a decision, once the two princes breathed their last, Jiang Pingji would lead the army to attack the royal city. There was clearly a bright path in front of them. Why should they accompany the royal family to hell? In order to appease their anger, a few old ministers were willing to help hide the blood of the royal family and find an opportunity to make a comeback in the future. If they did not surrender to the enemy, the third prince would really be fooled. He believed that they were really thinking for the sake of the royal family. Report: the enemy outside the city is moving again. The messenger presented a letter which attracted everyone's attention. This time the letter was not written in the Chinese characters of the Central Plains. It was written in the barbarian language. Everyone could read it without any difficulty. Chapter 10:19. In terms of poison, no one could beat Jiang Pingji. Not only was her mouth poisonous, but her ability to invert right and wrong was something that others could only look up to. It was the third prince who intercepted the right chief minister's trusted aide and took the opportunity to assassinate her. She made it sound like the right chief minister and the third prince had sent their own messengers. She accepted the third prince's surrender and promised that if the third prince helped her to take down King City, she would spare his life. Seeing that the deal was about to be concluded, the right chief minister also sent his men to surrender. Who knew that the surrender was fake and the assassination was real? She was lucky to escape. In her anger, she killed both of them. One of them was burned to ashes and the other was hung outside the camp. The third prince had never imagined that Jiang Pingji would lie. She was trying to force him to his death. The sixth prince glared at the third prince. His eyes were vicious and sinister, as if he wanted to skin the third prince alive. The eldest prince saw the situation and quickly stepped forward to persuade him. Anyone could betray the third prince, but not the third prince. Please calm down, acting prince. You have a deep brotherhood with my third brother. You know him very well. How could he betray the country? The sixth prince sneered. Isn't the man hanging in Lu Shi's camp the third prince's trusted aide? The eldest prince was speechless. He quickly looked at the right chief minister. The right chief minister Sahas's heart skipped a beat. His plump cheeks were covered in sticky sweat. He was terrified. He knew that if he proved that the third prince did not betray the north borderline, he would be admitting that he had betrayed the north borderline. For the sake of his own life, he could only insist that the third prince had sent his trusted aide to the enemy. He had sent his aide to assassinate Lu Shi. The eldest prince threatened, "Right chief minister, think carefully before you speak." He did not have a good relationship with the third prince, but he could not allow him to be slandered to death. The right chief minister Suesa secretly clenched his teeth, but his words indirectly sentenced the third prince to death. Last night I sent my trusted subordinates to assassinate that traitor Lu. Unfortunately, that traitor Lu was treacherous and had countless masters guarding him, so the assassination failed. I don't know anything else. As soon as the right minister's voice fell, the third prince's face turned pale. The scene in front of him was dim and uncertain. His legs were weak and he almost couldn't stand straight. Good, you are really my good brother. The sixth prince laughed in anger and pointed at the third prince. Guards, now that we are facing a great enemy, we brothers should work together to fight against that traitor Lu. How can we fight among ourselves and harm ourselves? The first prince tried to stop him. Acting king, you can't trust the words of that traitor Lu. Didn't that demoness set up a scheme to make you kill third brother? The sixth prince was so enraged that half of his face had turned ashen. How dare you? Are you the substitute king or am I the substitute king? There's no place for you to speak here, back off. The first prince had no choice but to retreat. Although the third prince was not killed on the spot, he was arrested and imprisoned. Third brother, I will think of a way to protect you. Sixth brother is no longer reliable, he has already gone mad. The eldest prince secretly went to the prison to comfort the third prince. The third prince sneered and declined to comment. After the first prince left, the smile on the corner of the third prince's mouth gradually widened. His laughter overflowed from his throat, and the volume of his voice went from low to high and crazy. Northern borderline is going to perish. It's really going to perish. Master, I can't protect northern borderline. I'm useless. The third prince had laughed enough. His crimson eyes were dripping with turbid tears. His strength seemed to have been sucked out of his body as he slumped to the ground. He took out a dagger from his pocket and pulled out the blade. He had already foreseen the end of northern borderline, but he did not want to see it fall into the hands of the enemy. It was better to end his life before that happened. At least before he died, that traitor Lu had not succeeded, and northern borderline had not changed hands. In the underworld he would still have some face to see his master. The dagger drew a white light in the air and the sharp blade pierced straight into his chest. Sharp pain spread to his limbs and bones. The veins on the third prince's forehead bulged, and his bloodshot eyes almost popped out of their sockets. His eyes were filled with hatred and unwillingness. His life was rapidly draining from his body. Report, His Highness has committed suicide in the prison. The first prince heard the news and was so shocked that his mind went blank. Third brother, committed suicide? The sixth prince's reaction was similar, but he asked a question. Third brother really committed suicide to escape punishment? The third prince still had a younger brother who tricked his brother, the fifth prince. Although the fifth prince was very stupid and had always been a hindrance to his brother, when he heard the news of his brother's death, he immediately rushed to the palace to make a scene. The imperial court was in a mess and the right chief minister was uneasy. Only the real culprit was still laughing at the situation. Feng Zhen and the others had always felt that they were ruthless enough, but when it came to their lord they felt that they were still far from it. She got rid of a thorn in her side without any bloodshed. Who else could it be? It was a pity that such a lord did not become a counselor. Sun Wen sighed faintly. Meeting the lord, northern borderline's fate has come to an end. Although it was said that the winner took all and the loser was in the wrong, there was still the feeling of the fox mourning the death of the rabbit. It was rare for northern borderline to have two smart people, but they both died under the lord's schemes. Wuxia said, "The lord is the child of destiny. Northern borderline fighting against her will naturally lead to death." Sun Wen looked up at Wuxia. The other's expression was very calm without the slightest hint of flattery. The child of destiny? Unifying the world and dominating the 9 states, Wuxia said. "Do you not believe me?" Sun Wen chuckled and stroked his beard. "If that's the case, I've made a huge profit. I've made a huge bet." No matter how tragic the third prince's death was, he was just an enemy. Wuxia and the others did not have the time to pity him. The army rested for 2 days and prepared to attack northern borderline again. When the loud horn sounded, hundreds of thousands of soldiers surrounded King City. Everyone in the city was in a state of panic. 7th prince and 8th prince are not dead yet. What does that traitor Lu mean by this? 6th prince, who had a pair of thick dark circles under his eyes, questioned the officials in an irritable manner. The officials were anxious, and only after a long while did one person step forward. This person said in a trembling voice, "Acting king, that traitor Lu ordered people to cut the ropes on the 2 princes." 6th prince was so shocked that his face turned pale. 3 days had passed. 7th prince and 8th prince were extremely tenacious. They had not breathed their last and even had some consciousness left. Military counselor Feng, those 2 are still breathing. Feng Zhen put his hands in his sleeves and closed his eyes slightly. He sneered. "Still breathing? Cut the ropes and they're not breathing anymore." The soldier's heart skipped a beat. He obeyed and climbed up the archer tower. 7th prince and 8th prince were still in a daze. When they heard that they were going to cut the ropes, their eyes lit up. 8th prince coughed up blood and said in a hoarse voice, "Traitor Lu, how dare you go back on your word?" Although 7th prince did not say anything, his expression was also crazed. The soldier ignored the 2 of them and cut the ropes with his sword. The archer tower was extremely tall. Even a living person would die if they jumped down, let alone 7th prince and 8th prince who were on their last breath. When the 2 corpses landed on the ground, Jiang Pingji pulled out the sword from her waist and pointed it at King City of Northern Borderline. Chapter 10:20. Wherever the blade pointed, it was invincible. Following Jiang Pingji's order, the imposing army launched a powerful attack on the city walls. The Northern Borderline was a nomadic people, and the vast grassland was the stage for them to dominate. Although the city was built in the style of the Han family of the Central Plains, the defensibility of the city was far from the standard of a capital city. Faced with the ferocious besiegers, the Northern Borderline unsurprisingly retreated step by step. Even though they occupied the city walls, they did not last long. The city wall was destroyed by the crazy bombardment of the catapults, and the guards on the city gate could not withstand the wave of arrows that came from below. After only a quarter of an hour, the city gate of the Beijiang kingdom was breached. Jiang Pingji led the army up the city wall and opened the 4 city gates. Report. Acting king, that traitor Lu has broken through the city gates and is leading his troops to attack the imperial court. Report. Thief Lu is leading troops to attack the imperial court. A gate has fallen. Report. Bad news came one after another. The 6th prince was wearing the dragon robe that only the king of the northern borderline was qualified to wear. He sat on the throne in a daze as if he did not hear what the messenger had said. He stared blankly ahead as if waiting for someone. It was unknown when the officials in the court had dispersed. A large number of palace maids hurriedly packed up their belongings and prepared to escape. Everyone only cared about themselves. How could they care about others? The enemy's shouts were getting closer and closer. The 1st prince and the 5th prince, who didn't have time to escape, put on their armor and led the remaining soldiers to make a last stand. Seeing that the imperial court was about to fall, the 6th prince seemed to have sensed something and finally came back to his senses. A hint of madness appeared on his pale and tired face. He got up from the throne and walked down the stairs leisurely. He poured the candle oil that he had prepared in the morning all over the tent and the luxurious tassels used for decorations. The 6th prince murmured with a ferocious expression, "I will always be the king of the northern borderline." He waved his hand and knocked over the 9 dragons playing with Pearl's bronze lamp used for illumination in the tent. The flame that fell from the lamp touched the lamp oil and the fire spread rapidly. He splashed oil on his clothes, and in a short time he had turned into a man of blazing fire. As the raging fire burned his body, the 6th prince uncontrollably let out a blood-curdling scream that sounded like a ghost being tortured. The scream was so shrill that anyone who heard it would feel their hair stand on end. After a fierce battle, the 1st prince and the 5th prince were covered in blood. Their bodies were covered in wounds and they were on the verge of death. But no matter how they killed or how they tried to break out of the encirclement, the enemy seemed to be endless, forcing them to retreat step by step. Royal court. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the blazing flames in the direction of the royal court. The 1st prince was shocked. 6th brother, he had thought that with the 6th prince's temperament he would lead the crowd to beg for mercy from the enemy. He had not expected that the 6th prince would choose to burn himself. The eldest prince was distracted, but his enemy was not. Facing the siege of a dozen soldiers armed with spears, they had no strength to resist. Puff, puff. The sound of a spear piercing into flesh and blood rang out. The 1st prince and the 5th prince had their backs against each other. Long spears were stuck in front of them, and their bodies were riddled with bloody holes from which scarlet blood flowed. Swallowing their last breaths, they closed their eyes unwillingly, taking away their last reluctance to leave this world. Jiang Pingji studied the topographic map of the royal city of the northern borderline overnight and figured out the residences of the nobles. After conquering King City, she immediately sent people to surround these places and stop the nobles from the northern borderline who intended to escape. People could die, but their property had to be left behind. Climbing up the broken city wall, Qiguan Rang squinted slightly. There was an indecipherable look in his eyes. Ever since I was born, I never thought that one day I would be able to climb this city wall and overlook the once arrogant and insufferably arrogant northern borderline. Qiguan Rang's hand in his sleeves clenched the feather fan tightly. This was the only way he could restrain his urge to lose control and vent his anger. The northern borderline was a huge rock that pressed down on his heart. When he occasionally thought of it, he always felt breathless. Now that he had completely stepped on it, he turned around and looked. The northern borderline, which was once like a mountain, did not seem like much. Among the officials under Jiang Pingji, his background and social status were only slightly higher than Su Ke's. He was the son of a Han woman and a northern borderline horse bandit. He was born a filthy bastard. The Han people despised him and the northern borderline could not tolerate him. If he was not smart and had a more meticulous mind than others, how could he have grown up safely? In the end, Qiguan Rang still sided with the Central Plains. Qiguan Rang had a mother who was willing to compromise, a teacher who taught him earnestly, a wife who was deeply in love with him, and a lovely daughter. Qiguan Rang had chosen his own side. The existence of the north borderline had become a thorn in his heart, constantly reminding him of his unbearable birth. There will be no more northern borderline in the future. Wei Xiai saw Qiguan Rang secretly climbing up the city wall. He was afraid that something would happen to him, so he quietly followed and watched him. Qiguan Rang heard Wei Si's voice and did not look surprised. He did not directly answer Wei Si's statement. He only said lightly, as long as the northern borderline still exists, there will always be new herdsmen. They will become the new northern borderline. The crux of the northern borderline's barbarism and bloodthirstiness was never bloodline. Even if the Han people lived in the northern borderline, they had to adapt to the environment there. They were gradually transformed into a nomadic people who galloped on horses. If this was not fundamentally changed, there might be a new northern borderline that would invade the Central Plains people in a few hundred years. How could the Lord not know this? Wei Si smiled faintly and said, "She knows what she's doing." Qiguan Rang's eyes slanted and his peripheral vision fell on Wei Si. His eyes sparkled as if he was sizing something up. After a while he said, "Is she the one who knows what she's doing, or are you the one who knows what you're doing?" Wei Si's heart skipped a beat. He said calmly, "Wenjing, what do you mean?" Qiguan Rang folded his hands in his sleeves and looked calm. The corners of his lips curled up slightly, but there was not a trace of warmth in it. He said, "The Lord will always be the Lord. If she finds out that you have any disloyal intentions, Wei Zixiao, you and I will definitely fight it out." Wei Si suddenly thought of the meteorite warning in his previous life. Looking at Qiguan Rang's expressionless face, he vaguely understood something. No one in the world can be more loyal to her than me. Qiguan Rang snorted and did not comment. Although Wei Si was a warm person, Qiguan Rang was very suspicious. Other than his family and the Lord, he kept a certain distance from everyone. There was one thing that Qiguan Rang still could not understand. What was Wei Si's motive for joining the Lord? In the beginning there were only him and Su Ku in the Lord's tent. There was no need to explain the reason. Feng Jin had no choice but to join because of the earthquake in Shangjing. At that time the Lord was poor and had no reputation. How could she attract Wei Si to join her from afar? Because he could not figure it out, Qiguan Rang's suspicion towards Wei Si had not been let go until now. The two of them descended the city wall. The battle cries in the city had gradually subsided. The air was filled with the smell of burning. Qiguan Rang sorted out his emotions and regained his usual composure. Chapter 10:21. Wenjing and Zixiao, you're here. Where did you go? I couldn't find you. Jiang Pingji's armor was covered in blood. Some were fresh, some were dried and dark. She looked like she had just returned from the battlefield. The broadsword beside her had countless cuts. The edge of the blade was curled up and there were pieces of flesh hanging on it. Jiang Pingji didn't feel anything. She held a few gold ingots in her left hand and a dozen strings of pearls in her right. She was surrounded by chests of all sizes. Each chest was filled with countless gold, silver, and jewelry. They were so bright that they were blinding. That was not the end of it. More soldiers came over with boxes. Looking at their strenuous movements, one could imagine how heavy the boxes were. Without exception, these boxes were looted from the private storehouses of the nobles and the royal family. Qiguan Rang said, "The city wall has a nice view, so I climbed up to take a look." "What view is so nice?" Jiang Pingji held a dozen strings of pearls in her hand. Each pearl was round and full with a warm luster. They were all top-grade pearls. The audience in the streaming room shouted, "If you came a little later you wouldn't get a share." The corner of Qiguan Rang's mouth twitched. Conquering the northern borderline and leading a strong army would be recorded in history. But when the Lord said that, there was a lingering sense of banditry. They were a regular army, not a mob. The northern borderline is really rich. If I had known, I would have been more ruthless. Jiang Pingji threw the pearls and the gold ingots back. Hearing the sound of the objects colliding, the audience's hearts were in their throats. What if the wastrel accidentally broke it? Fireworks, Jiyuan. Streamer, put your hand into the box and stir it. Let me see if it's the same as the props in the TV series. Such a big box. Is it possible that it's the same inside and out? From the bottom to the top, it's all real gold, silver, and jewelry? Xiao Jixing, it must be real. This isn't a TV series. It can't be that there's only one layer on top and the bottom is all hollow. If the nobles of the northern borderline dared to deceive the streamer with fake goods, the streamer might drag them back from the king of hell and whip their corpses. The Fairy Queen's crimson, "Dear Brain Master, you've made a fortune. Can I buy on Double 11? POTUS Mommy, I'm looking for a streamer who can help me empty the shopping cart. Jiang Pingji secretly curled her lips. The north borderline would not put fake goods in the private storage of the manor. If the goods presented were fake, someone must have pocketed it. However, she was strict with the army, so no one would dare to do such a thing. If someone committed a crime, they would at most be greedy for a small fortune. If the water was too clear, there would be no fish. Jiang Pingji would not go overboard. As long as it did not violate the principles of discipline such as robbery or killing the innocent, she could turn a blind eye to it. Qiguan Rang smiled and said, "It's not too late now." The northern borderline imperial court had already been destroyed, and most of the nobles were in Wangqing. The rest were all small tribes that could be completely annihilated in a short amount of time. Wouldn't all the money they plundered belong to the lord? Jiang Pingji felt comforted when she heard that, but the more comforting thing was yet to come. Jiang Nongqin, dressed in armor, walked over with a bloody aura. She cupped her fists and said, "Greetings, my lord. Officer Jiang, do you want to come and see if there's anything you like here? You can pick some to reward the soldiers of the female camp." Jiang Pingji greeted them warmly. In this battle, the female camp not only made great contributions on the battlefield, but they also made great contributions to the logistics. She would not mistreat the meritorious service, but her attitude was too bold. "On behalf of the female camp, I thank my lord for the generous reward." Jiang Nongqin said, "My lord, the soldiers found a severely rotten male corpse in the imperial court. The male corpse was rotten and had maggots, but he was wearing clothes that looked like a dragon robe. After questioning the palace maids carefully, we found out his identity. Bring him up for a look." Jiang Pingji raised her eyebrows and said, "Could it be the king of the north borderline?" The soldiers of the female camp carried a stretcher up. The stretcher was covered with a thin blanket, but even so, it could not hide the overwhelming stench. Jiang Pingji did not mind the stench. She squatted down and lifted the thin blanket, revealing the male corpse in the dragon robe. In less than a second, densely packed bullet screens covered the sky and covered almost every corner of the screen. The audience was experienced and knowledgeable, but they had never seen a male corpse that had rotted to such a serious extent. The taste was too strong. Half of his face had rotted away. Corpse fluid flowed everywhere. Densely packed maggots crawled out of his half-exposed nose bone and burrowed into the hole below his brow bone. There was almost no part of his skin and flesh that was unscathed. Upon closer inspection, there were also white and fat maggots wriggling inside. His neck and collarbone were almost rotten. His skin and flesh hung unstably. One could vaguely see maggots crawling up and down his collarbone and neck bone. Further down, the audience did not dare to watch at all. They all went to vomit. However, Jiang Pingji said calmly, "Looking at the age of his bones, his age does match." Jiang Nongqin also sighed with emotion. "I heard that the king of the north borderline was also an ambitious and ruthless man of his generation. I did not expect him to suffer a stroke and be paralyzed. He starved to death on his bed. His corpse had rotted to this extent, but no one collected it. This kind of ending is really sad. Each of his 9 princes had died a tragic death. Even he had ended up in such a state. Sad." Jiang Pingji sneered. "In troubled times, human life is like grass. If I fail, I may end up worse than him. No matter what, at least the king of the north borderline would have a complete corpse. In troubled times, many people died without a complete corpse." Jiang Nongqin said, "My lord, your martial arts are prosperous. You will certainly live a long and peaceful life." Jiang Pingji could not help but laugh. "Carry it down and burn it. Leaving a rotting corpse will easily cause an epidemic. It's not clean." The corpse of the king of the north borderline was carried down. Li Yun brought up another 4 corpses. "Who are they?" One was charred, another had livor mortis, and the other 2 were badly mutilated. Even their own mothers would not be able to recognize them. Li Yun, who was at the side, said, "According to identification, this charred corpse is the 6th son of the king of the north borderline. This is the 3rd son. Looking at the wounds, they probably committed suicide. His corpse was found by the soldiers in the prison of the north borderline. The other 2 are the eldest and 5th sons of the king of the north borderline." Jiang Pingji silently calculated in her heart. All 9 princes of the north borderline had died in battle. She rubbed her brows and waved her hand. "Send their corpses down and deal with them together." A family was particular about reunion and tidiness. Thinking about it this way, she felt that she was quite kind. Not long after, Fu Wang came over to report. "My lord, all the people have been captured. Please make an inventory." In a place like Wangqing, the number of nobles might be more than the number of mosquitoes. Fu Wang handed over a booklet. In it, the names of all the nobles of the north borderline were recorded in detail. Following the names were the number of their family members. The total number was close to 15,000. Jiang Pingji glanced at it briefly and put it aside. Her expression was cold and almost emotionless. She said, "The army has surrounded Wangqing so tightly that not even a drop of water can trickle through. Now even a mosquito can't fly out. If there are any fish that slip through the net, Fu Wang, bring your head to see me." Fu Wang cupped his fists and said, "This subordinate obeys." The deputy general followed behind Fu Wang and left. After walking far away, he asked hesitantly, "General, those people? Have they all been killed?" Chapter 10:22. "I beg you, please don't kill me. I beg you, I'll give you all the gold, silver and jewels you want. I'll give you everything you want, just don't kill me." They begged for mercy, but the Grim Reaper was indifferent. Under the threat of death, these people broke down and lost control of their emotions. "Lushi, you'll die a horrible death. Lushi, I curse you to never have a good death. Your daughter will be a prostitute and your son will be a thief. We'll be watching from hell. Mother, I'm so scared. I don't want to die. Mother. Father, where are you? I'm so scared." Fu Wang heard the shrill curse. He was already far away, but he still felt that someone was sobbing in his ear. If it was an ordinary person, he would feel terrible. But Fu Wang looked normal. "Say, General, don't you think the Lord is too?" The deputy general who followed Fu Wang to carry out the slaughter order could not bear it. His state of mind was not as strong and cold as Fu Wang's. He could not be blamed for being soft-hearted. The northern borderline barbarians deserved to die. He would kill a few of them without batting an eye. However, the old, weak women and children should be innocent. He even saw children who were less than a month old and women who were several months pregnant. Even though he sympathized with them, military orders were absolute. He had to order the archers to shoot randomly and execute all of them. After the execution, he had to check the bodies one by one and stab those who were still breathing. After doing this, the deputy general felt terrible. Fu Wang sneered and asked coldly, "If your wife was raped by the northern borderline barbarians, your daughter was raped to death, your old mother couldn't escape the devil's claws, your father and brother were beheaded and their legs were chopped off, and you were the only one left of your bloodline, would you think that they were innocent?" The deputy general was stunned. He did not seem to have thought of this possibility. If that's the case, of course I would want to bury the entire northern borderline." Fu Wang said, "Isn't that enough? Why are you so sympathetic? You think that the children of the northern borderline are innocent, but in my opinion they are the least innocent. He would rather let 10 adults go than let a child with the blood of the northern borderline's nobility flow in his veins." "Why?" The deputy general shook his head disapprovingly. "The child is still young and doesn't know anything. How can this be the same?" Fu Wang stabbed the long axe in his hand into the ground, leaned on the railing of the camp and let out a long sigh. Troubled times are different from prosperous times. In troubled times, there is no distinction between the old and the young. Fu Wang sneered and said, "Young children are far more threatening than adults. As for humans, whether they were dragons or bugs, they were basically fixed. They couldn't stir up any big waves. However, children were different. Who knew what kind of person this child would become in the future? It is precisely because we are children that we are easier to be used by others. We will grow old eventually. If the young master of the northern borderline is a great seedling, won't it leave hidden dangers for future generations?" Don't be fooled by Fu Wang's boorish appearance and reckless and unruly temperament. He was actually meticulous like dust. He had the intuition of a wild wolf and a pair of eyes that could see through the fog and see the truth. But that's just a possibility. The deputy general was a good, honest and loyal man. Fortunately, he wouldn't interfere with military affairs, so Fu Wang didn't deliberately correct him. Not even the slightest possibility. Fu Wang squinted and glanced at the place where the screams gradually stopped. He said coldly, "The Lord wants to bring peace to the world, so she won't allow any hidden dangers that threaten the peace to exist. Why do you think the Lord wants to slaughter all the nobles of the northern borderline and not even let their relatives go? Because the nobles of the northern borderline have more connections and financial resources than ordinary people. They can easily do things that ordinary people can't do. They are also a greater threat than ordinary people, so they can't be tolerated. Although the northern borderline was a barren land, there were also smart people among the nobles. If the nobles were compared to the brain and ordinary herdsmen were compared to the limbs of the body, then as long as the brain was removed, the torso and limbs would lose the command of the brain. How much combat power could they exert in the end? If these people are left alive, the northern borderline will recover in at most 20 years, and they will become a serious threat. At that time, new and old hatred will add up. Guess how many innocent people will die? It will definitely be more than 15,000. Fu Wang said confidently, war will not only hurt the people of the Central Plains, but it will also be a burden to the people of the northern borderline. If these people's deaths can be used to exchange for more people's lives in the future, they will die a worthy death. The deputy general listened and was stunned for a long time. After a while he said shamefully, "The general's state is extraordinary. I am ashamed." Fu Wang said honestly, "What extraordinary state? I'm just bluffing." The deputy general was dumbfounded. Fu Wang raised his hand and pulled out his weapon. He curled his lips and said, "The winner takes it all. If it was in the jungle, which wolf would not eat its prey because it is pregnant? If it does not eat its prey, it will starve to death. I really don't know how you have so much sympathy." The deputy general was speechless. After all, it was something that Jiang Pingji had instructed him to do. Fu Wang carefully compared the identity and age of each corpse and checked it again and again. He had to be careful. If there was a fish that escaped the net and came back 18 years later to take revenge and provoke a war between the barbarians and the Central Plains, how many people would die? Fu Wang yawned as he asked people to do the work carefully. To prevent people from being compassionate, Fu Wang sent out his trusted subordinates. Each one was colder and more ruthless than the other. Even if there was an outstanding beauty among the prisoners, they would stab her a few times without blinking until she breathed her last. Military advisor Wei? Fu Wang was busy. He did not expect an unexpected person to come to the tent. Observing the sky last night, I discovered that the stars in the night sky are strange. The destiny of the north borderline is not over yet. There seems to be a master of resurgence hiding. Fu Wang was so shocked that he lost all sleepiness. What? Master of resurgence? Fu Wang was stunned. Are you joking, military advisor Wei? Wei Ci lowered his eyes and said, "If you don't believe me, General Fu, you might as well check it out." Fu Wang asked, "Check? How?" When the left minister was young, he participated in the night bonfire and had intercourse with a shepherd girl and gave birth to a baby girl. The baby girl was secretly raised by the left minister and later became the legal wife of a member of the royal family who was down and out. The son that this woman gave birth to will be the person who will resurgence the north borderline in the future. Fu Wang was stunned. The left minister of the north borderline is Wu Liba. Wu Liba. Fu Wang hurriedly checked the register and found the page with Wu Liba's family. However, there was no illegitimate daughter as Wei Ci had mentioned, let alone any master of resurgence. Wait, I'll send someone to check. Military advisor Wei, please wait for a moment. Wei Ci was not in a hurry. He waited quietly, but his thoughts returned to his past life. The world had just been settled and the officials were worried about their children. Her Majesty wanted to appoint her eldest daughter, Chongsheng, as the heir apparent but was repeatedly obstructed by the imperial censors. In less than 2 years, Her Majesty became pregnant for the second time, which was the blessed longevity. When she gave birth to the blessed longevity, the remnants of the Red Lotus group rose from the ashes under the leadership of one person. They even spread their teachings to the officials' residences. Chapter 1023. Although everything was under Her Majesty's control, and it was even the result of Her Majesty's deliberate actions, Wei Ci could not suppress the hatred in his heart when he thought of the assassin choosing to assassinate on Her Majesty's birthday. How could he not be? Just a little more, and both of them would die. He wished he could bear the risk for her. The person who led the Red Lotus group to obstruct Her Majesty was not anyone else. It was the fish that escaped the net, that Her Majesty had accidentally missed when she attacked the northern borderline and slaughtered the nobles there. Wei Xi was personally in charge of the interrogation, so he was very clear about the person's background. He was the grandson of the wise Wu Liba. Calculating the time, this person was only 9 or 10 years old. As he was thinking, the tent was forcefully opened by Fu Wang. Military Counselor Wei is really amazing. The old man who served Wu Liba confessed. When Wu Liba was 16, he really got a shepherd girl pregnant and gave birth to an illegitimate daughter to be raised by an old minister of the family. Later, Wu Liba secretly married her to a branch of the royal family. Fu Wang walked too hastily, his breathing was slightly hurried and his forehead was covered in sweat. Although it was a branch of the royal family, it was just an illegitimate child of the king of the northern borderline. So there was no record of this person in the royal family. I almost missed this family. Wei Xi asked coldly, "Have you caught the person?" Fu Wang grinned. He said, "When we sent people over, their family was about to escape. The few adults in the family saw that they could not escape and committed suicide. But didn't the military counselor say that they had a boy in their family? So we searched carefully." He looked like he was only 10 years old, but he was silly and did not have the aura of a master of resurgence. "What about the child?" Wei Xi asked. "If this child was not killed, he would become a big problem in the future. Bring him here." Fu Wang shouted towards the outside, and a soldier brought in a little fatty who was tied up tightly. Wei Xi narrowed his eyes slightly, got up and walked to the little fat boy. He raised his hand and pinched his chin, carefully examining him. "It's not this child. This child is fake." Wei Xi said with certainty. He was really replaced. Fu Wang was shocked. "This is not true. The son of a servant. He doesn't look noble at all. His parents are slaves. How could he be the person Ci is looking for?" Wei Xi had seen that fish that slipped through the net in his previous life. Even though the face of a 20-year-old youth and a 10-year-old child was different, it was impossible for there to be no similarities. Looking at this person's face, the past few generations of his family had been poor and lowly. It was impossible for him to be Wu Liba's grandson. Fu Wang's face darkened. "Really?" Wei Xi said, "We'll know after interrogating this fellow." Fu Wang drew his sword and placed it on the fatty's neck, purposely intimidating him. Sure enough, the little fatty gave himself away. "Damn it," Fu Wang's face turned green. His subordinates did not take their work seriously. As expected, he had to do it himself. He led a group of people to chase after them. After following the clues for more than 2 hours, they finally found the person hiding in a latrine pit in the wild. The latrine pit in the wild was not deep and was about the height of an adult. Fu Wang had never thought that the main character would be hiding here. What a scary fellow. No wonder he's that old bastard Wu Liba's grandson. That latrine pit was full of maggots and flies. Seeing that we went over to search, the fellow jumped in and hid there. He's not afraid of drowning in the feces. He's so calm at such a young age. It's really scary. Fu Wang returned close to dusk. He said to Wei Xi, "That fellow is too smelly. Let the military advisor take a look at him after washing him." Wei Xi said coldly, "He's someone who's about to die anyway. His corpse will rot eventually. There's no need to wash him." Fu Wang said, "Even so, we can't let him stink the military advisor." The ancients were still very afraid of ghosts and gods. Although Fu Wang did not believe in this, he would not make presumptuous judgments about things he did not know. No matter what, Wei Xi's little demonstration of his skills made Fu Wang feel a little more respect for him. "I'll go take a look." Wei Xi, accompanied by Fu Wang, went to see the fish that slipped through the net. Although the fish that slipped through the net was only 10 years old, his appearance was already beginning to show. He had a handsome face and deep eyes. Wei Xi looked at him as if he could see through time and see the young man who was tied up in the dungeon. To be honest, if not for their different standpoints, Wei Xi would have quite admired him. To this day, Wei Xi still remembered what the young man said before he committed suicide. The traitor Lu massacred the people of the northern borderline. How many children who were crying piteously for food lost their birth parents? How many lonely old people lost their blood relatives? Millions of people, all died under her butcher knife. I just wanted to let her die with 2 lives. Whether it was in the previous life or this life, Her Majesty was the enemy of the northern borderline. But how could Her Majesty be the one who caused the situation in the northern borderline? Wuxia looked at the young man's corpse that fell to the ground and muttered to himself, "It's clearly chaotic times. Her Majesty just used her own method to end the chaotic times. She used the sacrifice of a few people in exchange for the peace of the world." If the young man really succeeded, the newly established Jiang dynasty would collapse and chaos might even reappear. At that time Chongqing was only 5 or 6 years old. Once Her Majesty died, how could Chongqing carry the country? What would become of the originally balanced court? However, Wuxia would not let the regrets of the previous life reappear. The child in front of him had to die. Perhaps sensing Wuxia's murderous intent, the child's brown eyes emitted intense hatred and murderous intent, like a young lone wolf. The child's breathing was slightly stagnant. He asked Wuxia in not very fluent Chinese, "You want to kill me?" Wuxia nodded. He raised his right hand and the soldier beside him handed him his sword. "Why?" the child asked again. "To cut the weeds and eliminate the roots," Wuxia said softly. "Do I need any other reason?" To the child, Jiang Pingji had killed almost all of his relatives. He could already remember, and it was impossible for him to forget. This blood feud would not end until one of them died. The child's face was deathly pale. After a while he felt the blood in his entire body turn cold. His body collapsed with a crash and his blood dyed the soil beneath him. Wuxia felt unprecedentedly relaxed as he sheathed his sword. Because of the previous example, Fu Wang was even more cautious in his work, and he completed the task Jiang Pingji gave him perfectly. "You killed someone with your own hands?" When Jiang Pingji learned of this, she did not care about the child's identity. Instead, she was concerned about the hidden reasons behind Wuxia's actions. "That child will be a hidden danger if we keep him. It's better to get rid of him as soon as possible." Jiang Pingji frowned and said, "Just kill him. Why do you have to do it yourself?" Wuxia said, "Mercy doesn't kill people." Jiang Pingji said, "Could it be that the child is a demon?" Wuxia said, "What I kill is the demon in my heart." After killing the child with his own hands, Wuxia truly felt that he could change the established future. Jiang Pingji was speechless. It was not until late autumn that Jiang Pingji completely conquered the entire northern borderline and annihilated all the nobles there. Just as she was about to heave a sigh of relief and enjoy the new year, she received a letter from Huang Song. Chapter 1024. A letter from Governor Huang? Could it be from the Mengs? Li Yun recalled the contents of the alliance between Huang Song and them. His heart tightened. Although the Mengs of Zhangzhou are strong, it won't be easy for them to take advantage of Huang Song. Qiguan Rang fanned the feather fan in his hand, a cold smile on his lips. The light in his eyes seemed to be able to see through souls. Huang Song's letter has a deep meaning. Sun Wen, who was sitting beside him, felt the warmth being blown away by the cold wind. The old man furrowed his brows and secretly moved his mat to the side. He finally understood why Feng Zhen and Wuxia were unwilling to sit beside Qiguan Rang. The northern borderline was remote and the winter was colder than the central plains. It was late autumn and everyone wished they could carry a hot water pot in their hands, a charcoal basin in their arms, and wrap themselves in warm clothes. Who would use a feather fan to fan themselves in this season? Unfortunately, the person beside him was that weirdo. Even though Sun Wen appeared calm, his brows twitched along with the rhythm of Qiguan Rang's fanning. He seemed to be enduring something. Everyone's attention was on Qiguan Rang. Only the audience sympathized with Sun Wen. "Zabayako, I feel cold even through the screen. Master Qiguan really didn't do it on purpose?" Dusk sunset. "I don't know if it was on purpose. I only know that Master Qiguan ruined the phrase, feather fan and silk cloth. Every time I read this phrase, I always think of Master Qiguan standing in the snow and ice, smiling and fanning himself. Wei Wei Chun Feng, to the one above, that's enough. Just thinking about that image makes me stick a few more heat pads." Occasionally holding a fan and pretending to be profound is pretentious and classy. Fanning yourself in the middle of winter is considered crazy. However, even if he was crazy, Qiguan Rang was still a prince charming. The audience laughed and chatted, but the atmosphere in the main tent was not so relaxed. It was like a lump of thick ink that could not be melted, making one feel strangely suffocated. "Meaning? Military advisor Qiguan, I really can't tell. What meaning can there be in this?" Li Yun read Huang Song's letter repeatedly. The first half was about greeting his lord and reminiscing about old times. The second half was a brief mention of the situation on the battlefield. Jiang Pingji formed an alliance with Huang Song so that the rear would not have any worries. The latter would help her stall the Meng family in Songzhou. Qiguan Rang sneered. Commandant Li, do you really think that Governor Huang is so useless? The lord had already taken control of the northern borderline. Huang Song had many advisors under his command, but they couldn't do anything to the Meng family of Songzhou. Li Yun thought about it carefully and said, although Governor Huang controls the land of a prefecture, Haozhou has only recently escaped from the chaos of war. In terms of wealth and military strength, Haozhou cannot compete with Song Prefecture. Prefecture Magistrate Huang delayed the Meng family for his lord, preventing the Meng family's army from entering the northern borderline. Yun thought that was their limit. Now that Prefecture Governor Huang's army is running low on provisions, it's normal for him to seek help from the lord. Qiguan Rang was about to speak when Jiang Pingji, who was sitting at the head of the table, suddenly interrupted. When did Bogeo become a prefecture overseer? Before the war at Beijiang, Huang Song had been a county governor. The officials in the tent, my lord, you've missed the point, Wei Xiai said. A few months ago the former Haozhou magistrate passed away due to illness. His sons were incompetent and none of them could inherit his father's position. His sons jointly recommended Huang Song, and Huang Song offered 100,000 dong of provisions to the imperial court. The young emperor was very pleased and agreed to this matter, appointing Huang Song as the new Haozhou magistrate. When Huang Song was promoted, Jiang Pingji and the northern borderline were in a heated battle. How could she have the time to care about this matter? Jiang Pingji smacked her lips and a smile hung on her face. After all, which son doesn't want to inherit his father's family business? The position of Haozhou's prefecture magistrate didn't fall into the hands of his sons. Instead it was taken by Huang Song. It would be a joke to say that his sons did it willingly. In troubled times the one with the bigger fist had the final say. Huang Song's power spread throughout the entire Haozhou. If the position of prefecture magistrate fell into someone else's hands, Huang Song would be done for. Speaking of this, Jiang Pingji suddenly thought of a detail. Bogeo offered 100,000 dong of provisions to the imperial court as a tribute. 100,000 dong of provisions was not a small amount, but it wasn't a lot either. For an ordinary army, 100,000 dong of provisions could last them for a while, but for the imperial court, it was just a drop in the bucket. Not to mention anything else, the salaries of the imperial court officials were huge food consumers. 100,000 dong of provisions wouldn't take long. Fengzhen laughed. I heard that the young emperor in Qinzhou is having a hard time. He owes the officials several months of salaries and there are huge gaps in his expenses. Without the 100,000 dong of provisions that Magistrate Huang offered as a tribute, I'm afraid the young emperor wouldn't even be able to afford his morning porridge. The royal family of Dongqing was now only an empty shell. Qinzhou is rich in resources and the people are rich. How can it not even provide for the daily expenses of the imperial court? Jiang Pingji hadn't paid attention to the news of the royal family for a long time. After the Huangshui meeting, the royal family was afraid that the feudal lords would seize their power, so they schemed against each other. Jiang Pingji left early with her people and focused on developing her own territory. After so many years, Jiang Pingji couldn't help but sigh when she heard that the royal family was in such a miserable state. The young emperor is young and ignorant. He doesn't know the hardships of the people. The Empress Dowager is the regent. She has illicit relationships with many ministers in private. She only thinks about enjoying herself all day long. How could she have the time to rectify the affairs of the imperial court? In the long run, even 10 Qinzhou wouldn't be able to withstand such extravagance, let alone 1 Qinzhou. Fengzhen laughed. Moreover, before the fake emperor withdrew from Qinzhou, he plundered the wealth of the people. Qinzhou is no longer as prosperous as it once was. The fake emperor retreated after plundering, leaving only a dilapidated Qinzhou for the royal family. The young emperor was young and ignorant. The Empress Dowager was in the prime of her life. The mother was strong and the son was weak. The Empress Dowager was in charge of state affairs, but she didn't have any talent. She only knew how to enjoy herself and spend without restraint. It was expected that Qinzhou, which had already suffered a great loss of vitality, would end up in such a poor and weak state. Jiang Pingji tapped her fingers on the table and narrowed her eyes. Qinzhou, It's a waste of resources in the hands of the royal family. It was good enough that the royal family could gather 20,000 to 30,000 troops. Most of them were old, weak, sick or disabled. How could they guard the huge Qinzhou? Fengzhen said, "You're not the only one who thinks like you, my lord. It's just that no one dares to stand out." The royal family was dilapidated, but it was still the royal family. If they wanted to take Qinzhou, they would have to destroy the royal family. That meant tearing apart the last layer of Dongqing's fig leaf. The feudal lords were afraid that they would become the target of public criticism. Therefore, during the Huangshui meeting, none of the feudal lords dared to covet Qinzhou. But now, the situation was different. Jiang Pingji put the matter of Qinzhou aside and changed the topic to the core of the meeting. Just now Hanmei asked. Wenjing hasn't given an answer. The corner of Qiguan Rang's mouth twitched. If his lord hadn't interjected and changed the topic to such a remote place, would Qiguan Rang have dragged it out and not answered? Qiguan Rang said, "Commander Li has underestimated Magistrate Huang's ability." Chapter 1025. Jiang Pingji smiled and agreed. That's true. Bogeo's power isn't as great as the Mengs of Zhangzhou, but it's not to the extent that he can't handle it. She had fought the northern borderline for 11 months, and Huang Song and the Mengs of Zhangzhou had also been in a stalemate for 11 months. Although she didn't understand the situation on the battlefield, Jiang Pingji believed that Huang Song wouldn't lose to the Mengs. Although the Mengs of Zhangzhou are strong, they can't withstand a prolonged battle. Moreover, the Mengs controlled Zhangzhou by force and are militaristic. They are already a spent force. Bogeo is a smart man. His strategists are difficult to deal with. It's impossible for him not to see the weakness of the Mengs of Zhangzhou. In other words, Bogeo only needs to defend the city walls, block the checkpoints and not attack. The Mengs will suffer losses just by delaying the battle. Jiang Pingji smiled faintly. Her words were full of affirmation for Huang Song. If the Mengs send troops to attack, Bogeo won't be defeated. Huang Song really couldn't beat the Mengs of Zhangzhou in a head-on battle. If it was just delaying the main force of the Mengs, Huang Song should be able to handle it with ease. However, Huang Song sent an urgent letter when Jiang Pingji had just taken care of the northern borderline. Thinking of this, Jiang Pingji's eyes flashed with coldness, and the corners of her lips curled up. Qiguan Rang bowed and said, "My lord is wise." A few civil officials were deep in thought. Their expressions were solemn. The generals followed the crowd and lowered their heads, pretending to be thinking. If one looked closely at their eyes, they would find that they were slightly confused. They obviously didn't understand. Towards this, the generals expressed their bitterness in their hearts. There was a group of highly intelligent people in the tent. As ordinary people, they were very stressed. Not only did the generals express that they didn't understand, but the audience in the streaming room also urgently called for the big shots. They urgently needed a big shot who was the representative of the language class for this segment that required brains. Otherwise, it would be like listening to a book from heaven. After many calls, a big shot finally appeared. Their bullet screens were also manually blocked by the idle people. Lao Ciji Lianmeng, I'm glad I didn't miss today's streaming. Seeing Huang Song's letter, I have a feeling that it's finally happening. Thinking back to the past, the host and Huang Song were still a bunch of scoundrels who went to the brothel to drink wine together. They were good brothers, but now they were plotting against each other. Qiguan Rang had said that Huang Song's letter had a hidden meaning. I was stunned for a long time before I understood what he meant. This letter wasn't a conspiracy, but it was an open and above-board plot. The target of the plot was the host. Why did he say that? Judging from the conversation of the streamer and the others, Huang Song could not defeat the Meng family, but the Meng family could not do anything to Huang Song either. Huang Song did not need help at all. However, Huang Song still wrote a letter. Why? Because he couldn't let the host have any room for further development. Gui Kai Guo Fengxiu, we saw it too. The streamer has just finished fighting in Beijing. Although she won all the way, it wasn't easy. For this battle, the host had almost exhausted all of her family's assets. After fighting for almost 11 months, she could be said to have turned out in full force. There was a saying in Sun Tzu's Art of War that was very true. In war, victory was the most important, not the most important. What he meant was that the most important thing in a war was to win it quickly and not to prolong it. The streamer has just taken over the northern borderline, and the people's hearts are still unsettled. The subsequent investment in governance is an astronomical figure, and the expenditure is no less than the investment in war. If she didn't handle it well, the Beijiang might rebound. Under such circumstances, it was really inappropriate for the host to continue fighting. Huang Song's request for help was actually throwing the enemy, who had not consumed much of their troops, to the host. If the war with the Meng family started, guess how long it would last? This was an open and above-board way to force the host to be militaristic. In Yueja Zhuge I really underestimated Huang Song in the past. This guy doesn't make any moves, but once he does, he makes people fall. This was an open and above-board plot. The host had dug a hole in front of her. She had to jump in even if she didn't want to. No matter what Huang Song's plan was, it was an indisputable fact that he helped the host to contain the Meng family's troops, so that the Meng family could not sneak attack the host from behind. Now that Huang Song had sent a letter asking for help, the host had no reason to refuse to send troops. No matter who won or lost, Huang Song could advance or retreat freely. Dense bullet screens floated in front of the eyes. Many of the audience saw the analysis of the big shots and felt a chill. Xiong Ben Papa gets dressed. This conspiracy theory is really scary. Did Huang Song really plot against the host? Yan Huiji Yuan, scratching my head. If I transmigrated, I feel that I wouldn't survive more than 3 episodes. Even Huang Song is so shrewd. How can transmigrators survive? When I saw Huang Song's letter, my first reaction was to send troops to suppress the Meng family. I didn't expect there to be so many tricks behind it. Host, why don't you send troops? Mo Longji, it's impossible not to send troops. If you don't send troops, the host is really finished. Huang Song and Jiang Pingji formed an alliance. Not only did he shed all pretense of cordiality with the Meng family, but he also sent troops to help her contain the Meng family's troops for free. Now that Huang Song was in an emergency, Jiang Pingji was unwilling to send troops to help. If word got out, Jiang Pingji would immediately become the public enemy. It was precisely because she had no other choice that it was an open plot. It's too early to make a conclusion. Jiang Pingji broke the almost frozen atmosphere in the tent. She smiled and said, Bogeo sent a letter, so there must be a change in the war situation. He got involved because of me. Now that the northern borderline has been destroyed, there's no reason to let Bogeo continue to fight alone. She was determined to win Zhangzhou. Zhangzhou was the largest horse farm in Dongqing. Countless warhorses were bred there. This place was of great strategic significance and was a must-win for the military. Even if it was Huang Song, Jiang Pingji didn't want to give up this piece of cake. Huang Song had his own plans and so did she. It was just a matter of who was more skillful. Lord, Qiguan Rang frowned deeply as if he wanted to say something. They had just conquered the northern borderline. If they rashly sent troops, their foundation would be unstable and others would take advantage of it. I know what Wenjing is worried about, Jiang Pingji said calmly. I also want to cultivate and recuperate. The current situation doesn't allow us to do so. If we don't send troops, perhaps the Zhangzhou horse farm will change its surname to Huang. At that time Bogeo will control Haozhou and Zhangzhou, then he will surround and take Qinzhou. If we are more ruthless, Bogeo will ally with the Su family from Zhe County, and we will become a dead end. Jiang Pingji's forces were all in the north. Now that she had conquered the northern borderline, it seemed powerful, but further south was the territory of Huang Song and the Su brothers. In other words, if Jiang Pingji wanted to expand further, she couldn't overcome these two forces. If she cultivated and recuperated, it was tantamount to giving the two families a chance to develop. It was better to take a risky move. Perhaps she could revitalize the whole chessboard. Moreover, Jiang Pingji's fingers played with the flame of the lamp on the table. Her eyes reflected the light of the fire. She said leisurely, in the battle at the northern borderline, we didn't lose much of our troops. Even if we fought with the Meng family from Zhangzhou, it was far from the level of militarism. She was tired after fighting at the northern borderline, but her muscles and bones weren't injured. Most of her strength was still there. She still had the strength to fight again. Chapter 1026. Lang Jun is back. Zhu Qingning was embroidering in the hall. Hearing the servant's greeting, she quickly stood up to welcome him. Before she could take 2 steps, her Lang Jun had already stepped forward and stopped her. Why are you so careful? Niesen's lips curled up slightly. His bright smile made the cinnabar between his eyebrows as red as blood. He said, Wunyang has 2 bodies now. If anything goes wrong, won't you kill me? Zhu Qingning blushed and said in annoyance, "Oh, I was wondering why you treat me so well. It turns out that it's because of my belly." Niesun did not panic in the face of this fatal question. Instead, he helped Zhu Qingning back to the main hall. Wunyang's words hurt. "It's obvious that you love me so much that you value the child in your belly. You're all my treasures. I feel bad if I mistreat any one of you." Niesun helped Zhu Qingning to sit down. "It's cold now. Remember not to wear so thin clothes. The room is very warm. You won't catch a cold," Zhu Qingning said. "Now that the month is getting heavier, the clothes that were made a while ago are also tight." Zhu Qingning used her right hand to touch her slightly protruding belly. Her originally slim waist was slightly plump because of pregnancy. Although she lost her graceful figure, it added a bit of the unique charm of a mature woman. "Ask someone to make a few more clothes. Not to mention 1 round, I can even put on 30 or 50 rounds." Before Niesun could finish his words, his ear was already pinched by a slim and soft hand. Zhu Qingning gritted her teeth beside his ear. 30 or 50 rounds. Not to mention 30 or 50 rounds, even if it's only 3 or 5 rounds, I'm afraid that you'll already have other beauties by your side. Niesun did not dare to struggle. He could only lean toward her according to her strength. His other hand held the mat to avoid really crushing her. "Wunyang, who's gossiping in your ear? Do I look like that kind of person?" Niesun tried his best to save his ear. Zhu Qingning pursed her lips and said with different intentions, "I don't even have a place to walk. Who can gossip in my ear? But my body is getting heavier and sometimes it's inconvenient. I really need to arrange someone to serve you early." Niesun's parents were not around. Zhu Qingning did not have a mother-in-law to pressure her. Logically speaking, their married life should be very happy. As a matter of fact, they were indeed happy at the beginning and their love for each other was joyous. As she got pregnant, her body became heavier and heavier and she liked to overthink. Niesun frowned and joked, "Madam is not such a virtuous person. Your husband still remembers what you said before we got married. If other women took a fancy to your clothes, jewelry, and rouge, you would give them to them generously as long as you had a good relationship with them. But if someone takes a liking to your husband, don't even talk about moving. Even if you think about it for a moment, you have to teach that woman a lesson." Zhu Qingning's pretty face turned cold and she snorted unhappily. "You think I'm willing? Isn't it all because of that lord of yours? Why did she send you so many women for no reason?" Zhu Qingning was pregnant, so it was easy for her to overthink. Looking at the young women in the residence, he felt as if something was stuck in his heart, making him feel extremely uncomfortable. She also knew that her husband was a man of integrity and would not touch dirty women, but he could not withstand accidents. His wife was pregnant and couldn't serve him. What if he couldn't control himself and secretly ate her? Rather than letting her husband cheat outside and touch unknown women, it was better to pick a woman he knew through and through. No matter which possibility it was, Zhu Qingning was not happy, and her emotions were on the verge of exploding. She was the youngest daughter that her father doted on the most, the pearl in his hands. Why should she push her husband to another woman? She couldn't do it. Niesun frowned. Although he had a clever mind, he was a man after all, and his thoughts were not on the same channel as a woman's. How did he know that his wife had been troubled these days because of the maids in the residence? After all, it's the Lord's good intentions, so it's not good to refuse. Leave them in the residence to look at, and if they don't feel good, we can just sell them. Niesun had never looked at the maids in the residence seriously. To him, the maids were just maids that served the madam. If these maids made the madam unhappy, they would naturally be sold. Niesun said with a smile, "Madam used to be so decisive, why are you so indecisive now?" Zhu Qingning let out a long sigh and said dejectedly, "I don't know either. These days I can't help but think too much and I can't control myself." Niesun suggested, "Why don't you write a letter for me and ask my mother-in-law to come over and accompany you for a while? If there was a mother-in-law to enlighten her, the madam would not think too much and scare herself." Zhu Qingning shook her head, "That's not appropriate. Mother is already old and it's not good for her to travel." Niesun said, "In that case, why don't I spend more time at home?" Zhu Qingning smiled and curved her eyebrows. The couple snuggled and said a lot of words of love, and the atmosphere around them was filled with a romantic atmosphere. "By the way, Zhu Qingning suddenly thought of something. Niesun answered vaguely. This morning the housekeeper reported that he found a maid. This maid claimed to be my husband's wet nurse. Zhu Qingning knew that her husband had been looking for his background. He found it in Dongqing from Zhongzhou, but the clues were cut off. Even after joining Huang Song, Sun did not give up on the journey to find his roots. Pai wet nurse. Over the years, Sun had seen too many liars who wanted to pass off fake eyes as genuine, so he was very suspicious of the identity of this wet nurse. Zhu Qingning said, "Does Lang Jun want to see her?" Sun closed his eyes slightly, and the bright red cinnabar between his eyebrows became brighter. He said, "Then let's meet." The couple had dinner together. Sun coaxed Zhu Qingning to sleep, and then left to see the so-called wet nurse. "You said, you are my wet nurse?" Sun looked coldly at the old woman who was kneeling in the hall. The old woman had been waiting for a day in fear. When she heard Sun's voice, which was clear and pleasant, she could not help but look up. When she saw it, she suddenly froze on the spot and her lips moved. Really like, the old woman murmured as if she was recalling something. Seeing her performance, Sun suddenly became a little interested and asked with a smile, "Like what?" The old woman said with tears in her eyes, "Second Lang Jun and Madame Jeanne are too similar." "Madame Jeanne?" Sun frowned, feeling that there might be a different harvest this time. "Who is the Madame Jeanne you are talking about?" The old woman said, "Madame Jeanne is Second Lang Jun's biological mother." Sun did not believe her. There were many people who looked alike in the world. Apart from that, there were many loopholes in some places. The old woman said that he was the child of Madame Jeanne, and claimed to be his wet nurse. From this, it could be seen that Madame Jeanne's husband's family should be well off. Since they were well off, how could a newborn boy be abducted and sold and end up in Zhongzhou? Sun asked, "Do you have any evidence for what you said?" The old woman said, "I remember clearly that Second Lang Jun was born with cinnabar between his eyebrows. When he was born he was plump and beautiful." Sun was speechless. Chapter 1027. The old woman saw Sun's unhappy expression and knew that she had said something wrong, so she quickly tried to remedy it. "I still remember one thing," she said hurriedly. "There was a red mole on the inside of your right thigh." After the old woman said this, Sun's expression changed slightly. Other than his servants and his wife, no one else knew about his unique features, not to mention his inner thighs. Sun had a feeling that maybe he could find the answer to the mystery that had puzzled him for many years from the old woman. The old woman cried, "Second Lang Jun, I really didn't lie to you. Every word is true." Sun suppressed his emotions. "Other than that?" The old woman choked. She thought she had said something wrong, so she said in a trembling voice, "Other than that, you look like Madame Jeanne. When I saw you just now, I thought I saw the newly married Madame Jeanne. What a beautiful person." Unfortunately, a beautiful woman has a short life. Sun didn't know what expression to show. He knew that he was very beautiful and he could outshine all the other beauties with just a little makeup, but he didn't like people talking about his appearance. His appearance was not as pure and unparalleled as Wei Xi's. Instead, he had an oppressive beauty. Because of his outstanding appearance, Sun was often bullied as a girl by the Nie family when he was a child. Sun still remembered the embarrassment and humiliation of being surrounded by people against the wall and being forced to take off his pants to prove that he was a man. "Are you serious?" The old woman said, "Of course. Madame Jeanne was very beautiful. It's hard to forget her." "You said that a beautiful woman has a short life. Did she die early?" Sun didn't dare to ask for specific information. He always felt flustered, so he only dared to ask for some trivial information. The old woman shook her head like a rattle drum. She said, "Madame Jeanne is alive and well now." Sun heard this and felt a little bad. His parents' family was not bad. Why did they abandon him? Sun took a deep breath. "Tell me everything you know." The old woman nodded but hesitated before she spoke. "Second Lang Jun, if I tell you, can you give me some money and food? My family's life is difficult." If it weren't for the fact that they were too poor, the old woman wouldn't have come to Sun to try her luck. She wasn't sure if Sun was the baby boy from back then. After all, she was the one who had buried the baby boy into the ground. Who knew that he was still alive? When she mentioned the red mole on her thigh, the man's expression changed drastically. Seemed like they were the same person. Sun frowned deeply and waved his hand to signal his servant to bring a plate of silver to the old woman. There were 20 ingots. The old woman's hands trembled as she stroked the silver. She was so happy that she didn't hesitate to speak. Second Langjun, what do you want to know? I will tell you everything I can. The old woman suppressed her excitement, and the wrinkles on her face squeezed together with a smile. Nyesun asked, who are my parents? Why did they abandon me? The old woman was stunned for a moment. She sighed and said, Second Langjun, you were not abandoned. Nyesun was startled. Not abandoned? The old woman nagged. This old servant was Madame Zhen's dowry maid and later married a manservant. Madame Lai gave birth to eldest Langjun, but she couldn't win back the master's heart. Instead, she was suppressed by the master's favorite concubine. Later, Madame Zhen and the concubine got pregnant at the same time. Even so, the master still didn't look at Madame Zhen. Madame Lai risked a difficult labor and gave birth to you for a day and a night. That concubine also gave birth to a son. The master favored the concubine and neglected the wife. He couldn't bear that the concubine's son was treated as a concubine's son, so he simply swapped you too. Nyesun felt like he was listening to a heavenly book. He was so angry that he laughed. Which family has such a strange upbringing? Mixing the legal son and the concubine and pretending to be the legal son? When Nyesun heard the truth, he began to doubt whether his ears were playing tricks on him. How could there be such a ridiculous thing? The old woman saw that Nyesun was angry and she hurriedly said, this is absolutely true, but according to the rumor, it seems that Madame Lai was not content with her marriage, and secretly had an affair with a servant and gave birth to you. Outsiders said so, but this old servant dares to curse that Madame Lai is innocent and has never done anything wrong to the master. It must be the master's concubine who made it up and slandered Madame Zhen's innocence. Nyesun quickly calmed down and his expression didn't change. I have a question. The old woman didn't know that danger was coming. Instead, she wore a flattering smile. Second Langjun, please ask. Nyesun said, you should be the concubine's servant, right? The old woman was so scared that her face turned ashen and her legs were trembling. This, Nyesun said indifferently, mixing the legal son and the concubine's son is such a big thing. There should be very few people who know about it. Not only do you know about it, but you even claim to be my wet nurse. It can be seen that you must have taken care of me in the past, so you know that I have a red mole on my leg. In that case, I have another question. How did I leave the mansion and end up being sold? The old woman opened her eyes wide in astonishment. She was so scared that she retreated on her knees. She didn't even dare to look at the plate of silver. Second Lang, Nyesun got up from the table, raised his hand and pulled out the sword at his waist. The tip of the sword was against the old woman's throat. Tell me the truth. The old woman cried and said, every word I said is true. The concubine saw that you looked too much like Lady Chong. She was afraid that you would arouse Lady Chong's suspicion during the elders' meeting, so she asked me to send you out of the mansion. She even ordered me to bury you. Hearing the word bury, Nyesun was basically sure that the old woman was telling the truth. Nyesun followed the clues to Dongqing and asked many people. The first person who found Nyesun was a farmer's wife. She accidentally heard crying in the ground, so she dug out the dying Nyesun from the soil. The farmer's wife didn't take care of him. Instead, she sold him to a human trafficker. Because Nyesun was good-looking, he was more expensive than a normal baby boy. After a few twists and turns, Nyesun ended up in Zhongzhou. Coincidentally, he was adopted by a side branch of the Nye family. Nyesun asked the old woman in a low voice. Tell me, who are my birth parents? Although Nyesun came to find his birth parents, he didn't have much feelings for them. He just wanted to find his roots. If his birth parents lost him because they had no other choice, Nyesun could consider helping them. If his birth parents abandoned him on purpose, he would make them regret it. Nyesun didn't want to acknowledge anything, not to mention giving birth. In his opinion, the essence of giving birth was just one sentence. When a man and a woman get together, they have children. The mother was pregnant for 10 months and the father was just a night of pleasure. They had the right to give birth to him, but they didn't have the right to take his life. The old woman looked at Nyesun's gloomy face, and her heart couldn't help but tremble. She said with a trembling voice, Second Longjuan's birth father is the leader of the Meng family in Songzhou. His surname is Meng and his name is Zhan. His birth mother is the daughter of a concubine from the Gu family in Langia. Her name is Gu Zhen. She has now remarried to Lu Shi, the second legitimate son of the Lu family in Hejian. I heard that Lu Shi is quite famous now. Second Langjun. I'm telling the truth. Nyesun was speechless. Say it again. I didn't hear it clearly. The old woman closed her eyes and looked like she was facing death calmly. She repeated it intermittently. Nyesun was so shocked that he took a few steps back. The sword in his hand fell to the ground. Chapter 1028. The night was dark. Raindrops the size of beans hit the window, making a pitter-patter. The candlelight was slightly intoxicating, and the shadows were reflected on the paper window, swaying. The shadows of the trees were like strange arms, shaking with the storm. The sound of thunder outside woke Zhu Qingning up from his sleep. She suddenly sat up, and the quilt covering her rolled up to her lower abdomen. The surrounding cold air rushed to Zhu Qingning. Langjun. She raised her hand to touch the side of her body, and found that the other side of the bed was cold. Langjun hasn't come back to bed yet? Zhu Qingning was a little worried. She picked up the fur coat hanging at the head of the bed and put it on. She picked up a lamp and went to find Nyesun. Seeing that the candle in the study was still lit, Zhu Qingning walked over slowly. She opened the paper door and a strong smell of alcohol hit her face. Langjun. Zhu Qingning had known Nyesun for a long time, but she had never seen him drunk. Even if it was the Lord's banquet, he would control his alcohol tolerance. But now, looking at the scattered wine jars beside Nyesun, Zhu Qingning's heart tightened and she hurried forward. Wunyang. Nyesun was a good drinker. Not to mention that he was only half drunk. Even if he was completely drunk, he wouldn't go crazy. He would just sit there obediently. Langjun, what happened? Zhu Qingning took out a handkerchief and wiped the wine stains on Nyesun's mouth. She felt distressed and thought about all the things that had happened recently. It seemed that only the wet nurse could make Nyesun lose his composure. She said, Langjun, if you can't find your family, then you can't find them. You still have me and the child in your belly in the future. Why do you want to ruin your health for a pair of parents you have never met? Nyesun opened his drunken eyes, and it took him a long time to regain his senses. He raised his hand and rubbed his swollen temples. He held Zhu Qingning in his arms like he was holding a child. His chin was on her neck and he said vaguely, Wunyang. I finally found. Zhu Qingning was surprised. Found? Isn't this a good thing? Why did you drink so much? Nyesun's arms rubbed her shoulders and his hands were on her belly. He had a bitter smile on his face. This is not a good thing. Wunyang, do you know who my biological parents are? Zhu Qingning asked. Who is it? Nyesun whispered in her ear. Zhu Qingning was not a foolish woman and immediately grasped the center of gravity. It's actually, apart from you and me, does anyone else know about this? Zhu Qingning sucked in a breath of cold air. If her husband had such a background, he would be in an awkward situation now. This matter is of great importance. How can it be spread out so easily? Nyesun shook his head. He said, this matter must be kept a secret. Meng Zhan didn't raise me, but he gave birth to me. In the eyes of the world, a son was still a son and a father was still a father. No matter how wrong the father was, the son could not disobey. However, Meng Zhan was a stumbling block in his master's way. He had to be removed. If this husband's identity were to be spread out, I'm afraid that some people with ulterior motives would make a fuss about it. I'm not worried, but I'm afraid I'll implicate you in the child. Nyesun didn't want to acknowledge Meng Zhan's kindness, but he couldn't stand the gossip of others. Zhu Qingning was heartbroken by Nyesun's words. He didn't care if Meng Zhan lived or died. She thought that her husband's life was rough enough, but she didn't expect him to experience so many unknown hardships. However, Zhu Qingning said in a low voice, Langjun, why don't you avoid the Mengs? There is no such thing as an impenetrable wall in the world. The mystery of Longjuan's identity is a hidden danger. If someone with ulterior motives uses it, how will you live in the future? It's better to be a bystander and watch. Nyesun felt bitter in his mouth. Didn't he want that too? But the world was full of tricks. Some things couldn't be avoided even if one wanted to. Meng Zhan was my benefactor, but he mixed up the official and the concubine to harm me. This debt of gratitude is offset. Nyesun reeked of alcohol, but his eyes were calm. In his position, he has to make his own plans. Since I'm loyal to the Lord, of course I have to make plans for him. For Nyesun, Meng Zhan was just an enemy he was going to plot against. Zhu Qingning's throat was stuck. She wanted to persuade him, but she swallowed her words in the end. Langjun, be careful. Nyesun sighed and patted his wife's back. He said gently, I know. The couple hugged for a long time. Zhu Qingning suddenly thought of someone. If what the wet nurse said is true, there shouldn't be many people who know about Longjuan's background. As long as they don't say anything, how will others know? Zhu Qingning's eyes turned cold. She gripped her sleeves and said harshly, that wet nurse. Langjun, have you thought about how to deal with her? Nyesun's lips curled into a smile. He said, I've dealt with her thoroughly. Dead people wouldn't reveal the truth. Even without Zhu Qingning's reminder, Nyesun wouldn't let the old woman have a chance to live. In addition, Nyesun also sent the old woman's family away that very night. He gave them a large sum of money for settling down. Zhu Qingning's nerves relaxed. The smell of alcohol made her feel uncomfortable. Langjun, you've already made up your mind. Why are you still worried? Nyesun sighed. He said, Wunyang, you don't know. I'm not worried about my background. I'm worried about the Lord. The Lord? Is the Lord making things difficult for you? No. Why is he making things difficult for me? Nyesun laughed. The Lord is good in every aspect, but he's a little suspicious. If my background is exposed, it's not a big deal. I'm just afraid that the Lord will be suspicious. After all, Meng Zhan's first wife is now Lu Shi's second wife, Lu Shi's stepmother and aunt. With this relationship, even if I tell others that I don't recognize it, they might not think so. People always thought that blood ties could not be broken. Even if the bones were broken, the tendons were still connected. From this, it could be concluded that Nyesun was Gu Zhen's son. He would definitely side with the Lu family. It was obviously a robber's theory, but countless stupid people regarded it as a standard. Zhu Qingning exclaimed softly. After a while she said, Langjun is loyal to the Lord. He's not the kind of person who changes his mind. I can't stop the Lord from thinking too much. Zhu Qingning was unconvinced. How can it be like this? Isn't Feng Bijie's second brother also working under Lu Shi? Feng Ju was Huang Song's most trusted official in Haozhou. Nyesun said, Huijie and the Lord have been close friends since they were young. Their relationship is extraordinary. How can it be the same? Zhu Qingning's face turned pale. She muttered, Langjun has already dealt with the wet nurse. No one should know about this. Nyesun smiled bitterly. It's hard to say. Zhu Qingning looked at her husband in confusion. Nyesun coughed softly and said in a low voice, I'm afraid that I've offended Lu Shi badly. Outsiders say that he's open-minded and carefree. But from my point of view, no matter how petty he is, he's still vengeful. How did you offend him? Nyesun said, I came up with a plan for the Lord. Zhu Qingning blinked and asked, and then? Nyesun coughed softly again. Chapter 1029. Zhu Qingning immediately figured out the crux of the matter. It was a blatant plot. Knowing that there was a trap in front of him, Lu Shi had to jump into it. Nyesun said, Lu Shi conquered the entire northern borderline. I thought it would take 2 to 3 years, but I didn't expect him to defeat the northern borderline in just 11 months. I heard a lot of news from the Lord. I have to admit that Lu Shi is definitely a big threat to the Lord. She can only feel at ease if she gets rid of him as soon as possible. If we don't do anything and let her stabilize the northern borderline and train a large number of cavalrymen, I'm afraid she can sweep Dongqing. Zhu Qingning was speechless. Hearing the name Lu Shi, the image of a youth in cotton clothes and wooden clogs hiding among the branches full of flowers appeared in his mind. He looked lazy and unrestrained. Even today that scene was still as vivid as before. Nyesun didn't know what Zhu Qingning was thinking. He sighed and said, I don't want to plot against Lu Shi. Lu Shi's power is in a delicate position. Even if the Lord doesn't provoke her, she won't let you go. Although she's a woman, her ambition isn't as simple as just one state and one county. If she wants to continue expanding her power, she can't avoid the Lord. Sooner or later the two of them will fight. Jiang Pingji had already conquered the entire northern borderline. In addition to the 2 states and 1 county in Dongqing, her territory was comparable to a country. The Lord Huang Song only had Haozhou. No matter what, he was no match for Jiang Pingji. Therefore, Nyesun had to plan for Huang Song and close the gap between them as much as possible. A glimmer of calculation flashed in his eyes. Nyesun's original intention was to annex Qinzhou and control half of Zhangzhou. The other half of Zhangzhou would be given to Jiang Pingji. If they could stabilize 2 states and half of Zhangzhou, Huangsong and Lu, she would have the capital to compete. However, Xianxia looked down at his wife, whose breathing was gradually stabilizing. A faint smile appeared on his lips. He didn't acknowledge Meng Zhan's kindness, but Meng Zhan owed him. He had to get it back no matter what. Why not use the whole of Zhangzhou as compensation? Xianxia carried Zhu Qingning and carried him back to the bedroom. Outside there was a thunderstorm, lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. Compared to Xianxia's blissful life with his wife, his brother Meng Heng was not so lucky. Meng Heng was wearing a gray scholar's robe. His sleeves and back were mottled with whip marks. Blood was flowing from his open flesh. The thunderstorm washed the blood from his wounds to the ground. Even in such a mess, he still tried to crawl to Meng Zhan, who was standing in the corridor. "Father, I beg you, don't make the same mistake again." Meng Zhan held a long whip in his hand. There were some barbs on the whip and there were some blood beads on the barbs. This whip was used to punish the unfilial disciples of the Meng clan. According to the clan rules, only clansmen who had committed grave mistakes would be whipped with this whip. Get lost. Since when did I have such an unfilial son? Meng Zhan responded with a cold smile. Years had passed and he looked older. His eyes were filled with a cold light. Meng Heng knelt in the torrential rain. His jade crown was nowhere to be seen and his long wet hair stuck to his cheeks and back. Even if your younger brother Meng passes away, it's not your turn to inherit the Meng family. I'm not dead yet. Meng Zhan was furious. Meng Heng had been studying abroad for years and he was always against him. From the Battle of Huangshui to the cooperation with the northern borderline, it was no wonder that his son was left behind by Guzhen. Every time he saw him, Meng Zhan felt disgusted, as if there was phlegm stuck in his throat. The corner of Meng Heng's lip was broken and the cold rainwater drenched his wound. The pain made him tremble, but he still stubbornly said, "Ancestor Duke Meng slaughtered many Chongwu people. As a descendant of Duke Meng, how can I go against the will of our ancestors and help outsiders? Now that Lu Shi has conquered the northern borderline, he will settle the score in a few days. Father, please stop. Don't let the people of Zhangzhou suffer." Because of Meng Zhan, the people of Zhangzhou had suffered for the past 10 years. However, as the Zongzi of the Meng clan, Meng Heng couldn't do anything. He couldn't protect the people of Zhangzhou. If Meng Zhan still wanted to go against Lu Shi and Huang Song with all the power of Zhangzhou, the people would suffer. Hearing Meng Heng's words, Meng Zhan was so angry that he laughed. He swung the long whip in his hand at Meng Heng's face. When the shadow of the whip passed, there was a horrifying cut on Meng Heng's face. His left eyelid was scratched and blood flowed down half of his face. "Someone take this unfilial son away. Let him kneel in front of the ancestral hall and reflect on his actions." If it weren't for the elder's advice, Meng Zhan would have killed Meng Heng. Meng Zhan was so angry that he smashed everything in the study. The flickering candlelight shone on his face. Meng Zhan's mouth curved into a hideous smile like a Rakshasa ghost. Lu Shi, the father and daughter had made him suffer too much. How could he swallow his anger? He was whipped by his father, drenched in the rain, and knelt in front of the ancestral hall for a whole night in wet clothes. Even if his body was made of iron, he couldn't take it. As expected, Meng Heng had a high fever that night. His body was burning and his consciousness was hazy. He was walking on the edge of life and death. 3 days later he slowly woke up. When he opened his eyes, he found that his left eye was covered by something. It was so thick that it made his eyes uncomfortable. Lang Jun is awake. Meng Heng's wife had been watching over him for 3 days and 3 nights. Seeing him wake up, she was so happy that she almost cried. Meng Heng's throat was dry. He only managed to say one word before he felt like a knife was cutting his throat. "Water." His wife brought him water and helped him swallow. "My eye?" Meng Heng weakly raised his hand and touched his left eye. He only felt a thick white cloth. "Your eye is fine. Luckily only your eyelid was hurt. The doctor said that if the knife had cut deeper, your eyeball would have been ruined." Meng Heng's wife sighed and quickly cleaned up the dishes. Meng Heng sat on the couch, his right eye lifeless. After a while his wife brought him a bowl of porridge. Meng Heng glanced at her wrist. The golden bracelet with 2 phoenixes holding beads was gone. "Where's your bracelet?" His wife's anger subsided when she saw that he was still so careful even though he had just recovered from a serious illness. "I pawned it." "Pawned it?" If I didn't, where would I get the money to buy medicine and hire a doctor? His wife sighed and fed him the porridge. Ever since you were disfigured and almost went blind, the Meng clan didn't even send a single person. They just threw you home to fend for yourself. Meng Heng's hands trembled. His right eye shone and was filled with water vapor. After a while he said, "It's been hard for you to be with me." His wife said, "We're one family." "Don't say that. Drink it. Don't ask for a beating in front of your father anymore." Meng Heng lowered his head and drank the porridge. His eyes swept over his wife's bulging belly. His wife had been pregnant for 5 months. The children in her belly needed nourishment, but he was disappointing and let them suffer. His wife took a deep breath and resisted the urge to cry. She lowered her head and heard Meng Heng's calm voice. "Toddy, how much money do we have left?" His wife whispered, "Only 30 taels left." 30 taels? Meng Heng mumbled, "That's barely enough. What are you doing?" Chapter 10:30. His wife put down the bowl helplessly and murmured blankly, "Leave." Meng Heng heaved a long sigh and wrapped his wife's hands in his big palms. His hands were warm and dry, which made his wife feel more at ease. Xianxia is not a place to stay for long. I tried to persuade my father to admit defeat so that the people of Xianxia would be spared from the war. But Meng Heng's mouth was slightly bitter. My father no longer cares about the people. Xianxia will inevitably be affected by the war. Xianxia might not be afraid of Huang Song alone. But with cousin Shi, Xianxia has no chance of winning. His wife pressed her lips tightly, her eyes filled with a sense of loss about the future. "Cousin Shi? I often hear you mention her. Since you are relatives, why can't you talk about it calmly?" Meng Heng smiled bitterly. He stroked his wife's hair with one hand and sighed faintly. "It's not that simple, Zhaodi. Even if we are blood-related, this relationship is fragile in front of the world, let alone a cousin." Meng Heng said, "My father's stubbornness will inevitably bring disaster to the people of Xianxia. If the Meng family in Xianxia still had the legacy of their ancestors, why would Meng Heng persuade his father to admit defeat? The Meng family had lost the people's support and would not last long." His wife turned around and took out her dowry. The bottom layer of the dowry hid the family's savings. "But there are only 30 taels of silver. It's chaotic outside. Where can we go?" Meng Heng looked at the silver pieces and then at his wife's careful posture. His chest could not help but twitch and ache. He suppressed his emotions and said in a low voice, "I'll spend 15 taels to nourish your body and protect your pregnancy. The remaining 15 taels to buy a carriage, dry food and a water bag. Let's go to Hanchang Pass. Out of Hanchang Pass, we'll go straight to Huda County at the border of Haozhou and Xianxia. We'll stay there for the time being." His wife's eyes widened and her hands holding the dowry trembled. "Langjun, isn't there a war there?" "It's because there is a war there that we have to go there. We don't have much savings. We won't be able to make it to Hejian County, let alone Wanzhou and Chongzhou," Meng Heng said. Huang Song and cousin Shi formed an alliance and helped her delay the Meng's troops. Now that the war in Beijiang had ended, Huang Song might not be able to sit still. He would definitely write to cousin Shi for help. "We don't have to go far. We just need to wait in Huda County." His wife was at a loss, but she was used to being docile and obedient. She would do whatever Meng Heng said. Looking at his wife's slightly protruding belly, Meng Heng had a look of realization. If it wasn't for the fact that Xianxia had no one to entrust him to, he wouldn't have brought his wife through the war zone. The risk was simply too great. Although Meng Heng was Meng Zhan's only son, his position in the Mengs was very awkward. He was even less favored than the son of a concubine. In the early years, the elders of the Meng family had taken good care of him. As time went by, Meng Zhan's pressure on him became heavier and heavier. Seeing that, the elders of the Mengs were planning to change to another branch. In theory, Meng Heng's wife should be the matriarch of the Mengs. However, Meng Zhan was too lazy to arrange a marriage for him, so Meng Heng didn't get married until he was 23. It was because the elders of the Mengs couldn't stand it anymore and took the initiative to arrange it for him. He did get married, but his wife's background was very subtle. She was the daughter of a branch of a declining aristocratic family. It was a nice way to put it. To put it bluntly, his wife was just the daughter of a butcher. The aristocratic families were also divided into different classes. The prominent aristocratic families could control the situation. The declining aristocratic families were even worse than the common people. Except for a famous ancestor, they had almost nothing. Meng Heng's wife was from a branch of a declining aristocratic family. To make a living, her grandfather gave up his pride and became a butcher. If it weren't for the genealogy, his wife's family would be no different from the common people. Meng Heng didn't look down on his wife's background, but he couldn't deny that this marriage was indeed a humiliation to him by the Mengs. Meng Heng had endured all of this. Now that he looked back, he felt extremely guilty. No matter what happened in the past, Zhao Di was already his wife. He had the responsibility and obligation to make her live a good life. But what happened? Fortunately, it wasn't too late to wake up. Meng Zhan wasn't a good father, but he couldn't be an irresponsible husband and father. The couple lived in a remote place. There wasn't much in the house, so it wasn't hard to put them away. Meng Heng drove his wife out of Meng County, Tsong Prefecture. Meng Zhan didn't know the news until they reached the border of Meng County. The subordinate waited in fear, afraid of Meng Zhan's thunderous anger. "You said he left Meng County with that lowly woman and went to Hanchang Pass?" Meng Zhan asked with a cold smile. The subordinate was so anxious that he was sweating. He said anxiously, "Yes. Do you need me to send someone to get Elder Langjun back?" Meng Zhan looked at the subordinate coldly. His eyes were full of warning. "Since when do you have the right to make decisions for me?" Meng Zhan snorted and said heartlessly, "Since he doesn't recognize me as his father, I will pretend that I never had a son. Send someone to tell the elders to open the ancestral hall and remove his name." The subordinate opened his eyes wide in shock. No matter what, Meng Heng was still a Zongzi. Since ancient times, there was no reason to remove the name of a Zongzi from the genealogy. Meng Zhan knew what he was thinking and said with a cold smile, "Zongzi? Look at his wife, a butcher who can't even be seen in public. How can a woman like her be the matriarch of the Mengs? Since he has abandoned the Mengs, then let it be. Alright, send someone to chase after him. Also bring a message for me. If he leaves the Mengs, don't come back. He is not a Zongzi of the Mengs and he has no right to use the surname Meng. Even his surname has been removed." The subordinate said, "Yes." For safety reasons, Meng Heng tried to take the main road. To take care of his wife, the carriage traveled slowly. It was only 3 days away from Hanchang Pass. The pursuers from the Mengs caught up with Meng Heng and brought a message from Meng Zhan. Meng Heng listened to the message with a pale face. His lips were colorless. His left eyelid, which should have healed, was hurting. The scene in front of him flickered and he almost lost his balance. "Elder Langjun, why don't you go back and apologize to the patriarch? There is no hatred between father and son." The subordinate looked at Meng Heng's pale face and felt sorry for him. Meng Heng's talent was second to none among his peers. If any family had such a good descendant, they would have been so happy. But his patriarch was a weirdo. Meng Zhan didn't feel proud or honored. Instead, he felt ashamed of Meng Heng. He scolded him every few days and tried to suppress him. They were not father and son. They were enemies. There is no hatred between father and son. But what if they are not father and son? Meng Heng smiled bitterly and held back the hot tears that were welling up in his eyes. He said gloomily, "Allow me to kowtow to him again. If there's a chance, I'll definitely repay him for raising me for over 20 years. Meng Heng knelt down in the direction of Meng County in Tsangzhou and kowtowed 3 times. His forehead was blue and red. The subordinate looked at Meng Heng, who staggered to get up and sighed. "Elder Langjun, the war is still going on. For safety's sake, you should change your route." Chapter 1031. Cough cough cough. "Who are you talking about? Who's here?" Huang Song was enjoying his tea. When he heard his subordinate's message, he almost choked on the tea. The subordinate could only bite the bullet and repeat it. Early this morning, Yuan Chong, the lieutenant under Huang Song's command, was patrolling. They found a couple whose whereabouts were suspicious, so they simply arrested them for questioning. Among them, the man had a scholarly temperament. Although he was wearing shabby linen clothes, he was neither servile nor overbearing when he asked questions. Obviously, he was not an ordinary person. Once she asked, she was shocked. The couple was from Meng County, Tsong Prefecture. Yuan Chong thought he was a spy, but upon further investigation he realized that the man was actually the eldest son of the Meng family, Meng Heng. However, Meng Heng smiled bitterly at Yuan Chong's suspicious gaze. That was in the past. Now I'm just a commoner without a surname. Meng Heng was expelled from the Meng family and his family name was removed. Hearing this, Yuan Cheng pulled out his knife and placed it on Meng Heng's neck. He said mockingly, "Old Meng's son, aren't you afraid of death?" However, Meng Heng said, "My mother is the stepmother of Lu Shi, the governor of Lu province. Lu Shi and I are cousins. Do you really dare to behead me?" This relationship was Meng Heng's final trump card. He was also certain that Yuan Cheng would not dare to kill him. Although Huang Song and Jiang Pingji each had their own plans, they had not completely fallen out with each other yet. Huang Song did not dare to kill Jiang Pingji's cousin, even if his identity had not been verified. After coughing enough, Huang Song wiped his mouth with a handkerchief. "Invite him over." After the subordinate left, Qing Jing, who was handling official business, put down the things in his hands and asked, "That person was Meng Heng?" Huang Song asked, "Yumo knows him?" Qing Jing said calmly, "Meng Heng and Jing were assessed in the same year. Originally he was the best contender for the top 3, but Meng Heng was influenced by his younger brother Meng Liang. In the end, the examiner gave him a very low evaluation, which resulted in Meng Heng not even making it into the top 100. When Feng Ju heard the commotion, he also came over to intervene. "Meng Heng is my brother's classmate. They have a good relationship," Feng Ju said with a smile. "If the person is really Meng Heng, Ju will recognize him." In fact, both Feng Ju and Qing Jing felt that the person who came was really Meng Heng. This was a sensitive time. Who would dare to pretend to be a disciple of the Meng family in Huang Song's territory? Was he not afraid of death? The three of them didn't notice that when Ye Sun heard the news, his hand froze and he almost dropped his brush. Fortunately, no one was paying attention to him. Ye Sun quickly adjusted his mentality and pretended that nothing had happened. Meng Heng was led by a servant to Huang Song. Huang Song had grown a beard and looked even more dignified and calm. "Greetings, Haozhou Prefecture Overseer." Meng Heng used the etiquette common people used to greet officials, but Huang Song was frightened and quickly stood up to stop him. Huang Song laughed. "Lanting and I are like siblings. You are Lanting's cousin, so you are also my cousin. There is no need to be so formal." Qing Jing and the others sat behind the screen and watched. When Meng Heng entered their line of sight, they confirmed his identity. Although they had not seen each other for many years, Meng Heng's appearance had not changed much. He had only become more mature and easily recognizable. Meng Heng smiled bitterly. Even so, etiquette cannot be ignored. Huang Song asked Meng Heng to sit on the lower right side and said hesitantly, "I have something to ask, but I don't know if I should ask." Meng Heng knew what he wanted to ask. He was doubting his intentions. "Heng has been expelled from the ancestral hall by my father. Now that I have no home to return to, I want to seek refuge with cousin Shi." At this point there was nothing to be ashamed of. Meng Heng simply said everything. "However, I am short of money and my wife's health is heavy. It is chaotic outside, so the couple can't go too far. I heard that cousin Shi is about to lead troops to Huda County, so Heng brought my wife here to wait. Sister-in-law is pregnant." Huang Song asked Yuan Cheng with a stern face. "You brat, did you offend her?" Yuan Cheng was worried about Huang Song's safety, so he personally brought Meng Heng to see Huang Song. Meng Heng revealed a faint smile. "Commandant Yuan is just enforcing the law. My wife is fine." Huang Song could not let it go so easily. He sent people to arrange a residence for Meng Heng and his wife. He also found an experienced midwife and a skilled doctor. Huang Song saw Meng Heng's embarrassment and took the initiative to say, "Just stay here. If there is anything you need, send someone to tell me." He had good intentions, so Meng Heng would not be ungrateful. However, Meng Heng was clear that Huang Song was treating him so well because of Jiang Pingji. He was taking good care of him. "Langjun, are we staying here?" Meng Heng's wife held her belly with one hand and touched the pillar with the other. She looked up at the sky. The sky was clear and the golden sunlight shone on her body. It was very comfortable. "We'll rest here for the time being." Meng Heng looked at the silk and satins, clothes and jewelry in the house, then looked at his wife's bare face. He helped her into the house. "Your clothes are old. Pick a few bolts of cloth to make some new clothes. Don't treat yourself badly." His wife touched the material. The soft touch made her reluctant to move her hand away. She had never used such good material in her life. "They are all gifts from others. It's not good to use them. In this way, won't you owe everyone a favor?" His wife resisted and forced herself to move her eyes away. I owe cousin Shi. I'll repay you in the future. Meng Heng smiled as he picked up a golden bracelet made of twin phoenix silk and put it on his wife's wrist. The golden color was far better than the one that had been pawned, and it was heavier. Because of the bracelet, his wife's wrist seemed even more slender and weak. In the future your husband will earn more for you. I will never let you and our child suffer any losses. If it were not for Jiang Pingji, Huang Song would not have treated him so well. Therefore Meng Heng was very clear about whom he owed a favor. His wife smiled. I believe you. It was a great honor for the butcher's daughter to marry the eldest son of the Mengs, but it was a great humiliation for Meng Heng. Meng Heng felt that he had treated her unfairly, but she felt that she had wronged him. No matter what, they were husband and wife. They would support each other for the rest of their lives. At that moment, the maidservant reported from outside the paper door. Meng Heng and his wife were stunned. This Nyesin, does my husband know you? His wife was surprised. They had just settled down here and someone had brought his wife to visit. Meng Heng was also puzzled, but he had also asked around. Nyesin was a strategist that Huang Song relied heavily on. He could not be offended easily. I don't know him. He's Nyesin's wife. Madam, please entertain him. Then he said to the maidservant, please wait in the hall, Mr. Nye. I'll go over now. Did Nyesin visit on Huang Song's orders? With such doubts, Meng Heng met Nyesin for the first time. The two looked at each other. They both felt a strange emotion rise from the bottom of their hearts. Nyesin did not observe Meng Heng carefully through the screen. Now that they were face to face, he realized that Meng Heng did not have any similarities with him. Chapter 1032. While Nyesin was observing Meng Heng, wasn't Meng Heng also sizing him up? When he saw Nyesin walking against the light, he vaguely saw the graceful and gorgeous beauty walking towards him, her face incomparably magnificent. Meng Heng took a closer look and finally saw Nyesin's true appearance. He couldn't help but sigh in admiration. There was actually such a stunning face in this world. After the surprise, Meng Heng vaguely felt that Nyesin's face was somewhat familiar, but the memory was too distant and he couldn't recall it immediately. Nyesin laughed and teased when he saw this. Sun's face is extremely similar to a Rakshasa, actually scaring Brother Hing to the point of not knowing what to say. When Nyesin said that, Meng Heng quickly retracted his thoughts and stopped thinking about where he had seen Nyesin. How can that be? Meng Heng said, if Brother Sun's face was like a Rakshasa, wouldn't Hing be too ashamed to meet people? Although Meng Heng had never met Nyesin before, he felt an urge to get close to him. It was as if the two of them had known each other for a long time. When Nyesin called him Brother Hing, Meng Heng very naturally followed up and called him Little Brother Sun. As soon as the two of them met, they addressed each other as brothers. With just a few words, they had become extremely close to each other. As Meng Heng joked with Nyesin, he was secretly impressed by the other party's thoroughness. Why did he say that Nyesin was thorough? Meng Heng was expelled from the Meng family. He only had his first name and no surname, so it was very awkward to address him. Nyesin called him Brother Hing, cleverly avoiding this point and preserving Meng Heng's remaining face. Was this not considered thorough? Meng Heng was grateful for her thoughtfulness. His expression softened and his attitude became friendlier and friendlier. Brother Sun's appearance is the most beautiful I've ever seen in my life. I'm afraid there are very few people in the world who can stand shoulder to shoulder with you. Brother Sun, you shouldn't belittle yourself. Meng Heng honestly explained the reason for his absent-mindedness. I was dazed just now. Younger Brother Sun, please forgive this older brother's rude and impetuous actions. Nyesin had known that he was good-looking since he was young. What kind of compliment had he not heard before? He was tired of listening to it. When these words came out of Meng Heng's mouth, Nyesin felt comfortable all over. The corners of his lips curled up a little. Meng Heng added, I'm not afraid of Brother Sun laughing at me. When I saw you walking over just now, I felt as though I saw an old friend that I hadn't seen for many years. Nyesin was shocked, but he said, really? So it's not just Sun who has this feeling. Although they felt like old friends at first sight, Meng Heng did not let down his guard. Instead, he secretly probed Nyesin's intentions. In his opinion, Nyesin's visit was definitely instructed by Huang Song, but he didn't know what the purpose was. After talking for more than an hour, the sky outside gradually darkened. Nyesin took his leave regretfully and Meng Heng stood up to send him off. After sending him off, Meng Heng still had no idea why Nyesun was there. Don't look at how they talked, but if you really analyzed the content of the conversation, you would find that they only talked about the interesting things of their youth and didn't touch on any political affairs. You really don't know Mr. Nye? Meng Heng returned to his room in a daze. His wife's puzzled question drifted into his ears. I just feel that he looks familiar, but after thinking about it, I really haven't seen him before. Meng Heng came back to his senses and said, I heard that Nyesun is from Bianzhou in Zhongzhou. Before he became an official in Huangsong, he never left his homeland. How did I get to know him? Why do you ask? Meng Heng's wife pointed at the pile of gifts on the table and sighed. This Madame Nye is truly a considerate and gentle person. Look at the gifts she gave. Every single one of them is delivered to the heart. Governor Huang's gift of silk satin and gold and silver jewelry is good, but this madam gave a lot of good fertility medicine and nourishing food. These materials are delicate and soft. Although they haven't been dyed, they're best for women and babies. Huang Song's gifts were expensive, but many of the materials weren't suitable for pregnant women. They looked good but weren't practical. Nyesun and his wife's gifts were heartfelt. It was as if everything had been considered. Not only were there gentle and nourishing herbs, food and cloth, but there was also a box of silver fragments. Huang Song gave him gold which he couldn't spend. However, the box of silver fragments Nyesun and his wife gave him immediately came in handy. The gifts weren't very expensive, but the thought was enough. Meng Heng frowned and raised his hand to touch the items. After thinking about it, Meng Heng's brows relaxed. Just now, Nyesun mentioned that his wife is also pregnant. Because Madame Nye was also pregnant, it was more convenient to prepare the things a pregnant woman needed. No matter how he thought about it, this was the only reason that made sense. Meng Heng glanced at his wife. When he saw that she was smiling and didn't look like she was wronged, his impression of Nyesun and his wife improved. He heard that Nyesun's wife was the youngest legitimate daughter of Master Yuanjing. She had an extraordinary background and a good upbringing. This kind of noble lady was prideful to the core and disdained to associate with lowly people. Because his wife was the daughter of a butcher, no one taught her how to deal with those difficult women when she was still a virgin. After his wife married him, she was often ostracized by the other noble ladies of the Meng family, both openly and secretly. Meng Heng knew this, but he couldn't help her. Every time he saw his wife's sad expression, Meng Heng felt bad. He could only try his best to help her. Nyesun and his wife came to visit. They couldn't just take care of Nyesun and leave Nyesun's wife to the side, right? In the end, the mistress still had to entertain them. From the looks of it, Nyesun's wife didn't have the bad temper of a noble lady and was very gentle. His wife said, "No wonder. Madame Nye looks childish, but she's very good at raising children." Meng Heng asked casually, "What's Madame Nye's personality like?" His wife said, "I was a little worried that I would neglect her, but after getting to know her, that Madame's personality is really great." She had interacted with many noble ladies, but they couldn't compare to Madame Nye. Not to mention anything else, just her temperament made people unable to help but get close to her. However, there was one thing that was very strange. Madame Nye was very respectful to her. But then again, she was only the daughter of a butcher. What did she have that was worthy of a madam from a noble family treating her with respect? That was why his wife asked Meng Heng if he was close friends with Nyesun. The husband and wife looked at each other, puzzled. It was late at night. Meng Heng and his wife were tired, so they washed up and went to bed. Meng Heng closed his eyes, but he couldn't fall asleep. Nyesun's face kept swaying in front of him. Meng Heng tossed and turned, startling his wife who was beside him. "Lang Jun." His wife was confused. Meng Heng's mind flashed and he suddenly remembered another face. "I remember, mother." Meng Heng blurted out. His wife was surprised. "Mother? What does this have to do with mother-in-law?" "Nyesun, he looks a little similar to mother when she was young. I was wondering why I thought he looked familiar." His wife exclaimed, "Mr. Nye looks like mother-in-law when she was young." Meng Heng said, "I was just thinking about who Nyesun looks like and I suddenly remembered when I was young. Nyesun does look a little similar to mother." The Meng and Madame Lu were enemies, so Meng Heng was also restrained. Even though he got married, he couldn't bring his wife to meet his birth mother.